The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies, Firestorm Games, and the generous donations of you, the listener. Thank you to one and all for your continued support. We very much appreciate it. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 261. Corpse Blimey. A discussion on army level gaming. With your hosts, Neil Shuck and Mike Hobbs. And very special guest, none other than Sir Sidney Roundwood. This show was recorded on the 6th of February, 2019. Hello once again and welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. 'Tis I, Neil Shuck, aka the Blimey Dwarf, and welcome once again to the show, and it is good to be joined, as ever, by my glorious compatriot. It is of course the Welsh wizard himself, Mr. Michael Hobbs. He has dug himself out of the snowdrift that has been in Wales over the last week. And he is joining us this evening across the airwaves. How are you, Michael?
Hello, Neil. You find me here, Neil, in hushed tones, in readiness for our new guest. So there'll be no shouting and screaming and anything excitable. I'm feeling humbled today. Humbled.
I must admit, I am. I'm impressed by your attire.
Thank you.
It's not often you turn up
in that.
Well, I wasn't going to mention that level, but yeah, it makes a nice change. But yes, I'm just wondering after the gloriousness of his usual podcast abode, having to put up and slumming it in the bunker, just how he's going to cope. I mean, you have rolled out the red carpet, haven't you?
Yes, the carpet has been rolled out. I've dusted. I've removed the gargoyles from the turrets, and evicted the spiders.
Excellent. And of course, we have moved the pile of games from in front of the door, haven't we?
No, the games are still out.
Ah, okay. Well, just to make sure that he doesn't quite trip over those on his way in. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So this evening, we are honoured to be joined by a person who can only be described as gaming royalty. I mean, here he is. It is the star of stage, of screen, and of podcast. It is the man himself. May I introduce Sir Sidney Roundwood.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I don't know what to say, Neil and Mike, apart from thank you very much for having me. And I am used to climbing over piles of games in the Lard Island workshop because Rich and Nick never put anything away. And I've got to say, I've slummed it in far worse bunkers than this. This is really very salubrious indeed. I do appreciate you both wearing the proper dress code, black tie, looking very smart, both of you gentlemen.
Yeah,
so thank you for making the effort. Cummerbunds are meant to be tight, though, aren't they? I'm never quite sure if they're holding things in or preventing people seeing other things. But thank you, Mike, for getting that velvet cummerbund out. It's very fitting.
The violet suits you so well.
Well, it does. That's what I thought. Nice cummerbund. Thing is, have I got it right? Because it's around my neck and it's a little bit tight. Is that how it's meant to go?
I think we're all of the age that, wherever you wear a cummerbund these days, Mike, that's probably a good place for you. Not the first place for a gentleman to attire himself with a cummerbund, but it certainly has a certain look about it. So well done. Well done.
Thank you. He said well done, Neil.
And of course, Eurovision, mate. Eurovision. I mean, just how long did it take you to sew on all those sequins?
Well, that's not me, of course. That is my tailor. The tailor's team who do that, of course. I don't actually do the sewing myself. But the outfit is new. It possibly will be coming to a late pantomime in a theatre very near both of you any day now. We have been rehearsing busily throughout January, but I think the tailor has done himself proud. I'm not sure about the bells on the shoes. They are a little bit
ostentatious?
Unusual, but I'm sure that they'll get a laugh. Oh, ostentatious is my middle name, Neil.
Yes. And that hat.
What was I thinking?
Yes.
The hat is always part of the wardrobe, as anyone who's ever met me will know. That and the wig.
How many ostriches did die for that hat?
They're just a little more plucked than normal.
Excellent.
Absent some feathers.
Yes,
so your listeners are going to be thinking, who is this utter idiot that you've got on the show? And what is it to do with wargaming?
Indeed. Well, actually, funny you should say that, Sidney. But obviously, yeah, if you're listening and you have no idea who it is that we are speaking to, Sidney, would you care to introduce yourself a little bit further? So, first off, how on earth did you get into wargaming?
Well, that's a question, isn't it? So I got into wargaming probably like lots of other people who are in their sort of late 40s and early 50s, really through a mixture of airfix. Yes, that's one buzzword, folks. School War Games Club, that's another one. Public libraries, and a non-school wargaming club. So all of those were big parts of me growing up in the late 1970s and early 80s. I used to love making model aircraft, model ships, and mainly airfix, but also Revell. Preferred airfix though. And I decided, with my friends, let's start having a game with these. And instead of throwing Lego bricks and marbles, somebody called Matthew Lazenby, hello Matthew, I don't know where you are, but you're a great friend, had his parents, his dad and his uncle, I think, were into wargaming, and we went around his house once, and he showed me all these figures which were laid out, and I thought, when are we going to throw the marbles at them? To which he politely laughed and said, no, there's rules for these things. And it was really Matthew who got me interested in wargaming, and went down to the library, found some books by Donald Featherstone, Charlie Wesencraft, Terry Wise, the rest is sounding pretty familiar. And when I was 11, moved to the secondary school in the UK, and they had a war games club, which was run by a guy called Mr. Farrer. Now, Mr. Farrer, if you're listening, thank you so much. He was a history teacher, he's a really nice guy. I lost touch with him a long time ago. And he ran the school war games club. And that was really my sort of wargaming upbringing while I was at school. And I moved on from there to the Humberside War Games Club when I was about 13 or 14, when I was allowed to sort of go from where I lived down towards the centre of Hull, which was where the club was. And the rest, as they say, was history. It's been a big part of my life and my friendships ever since then. And I'm sure that story is pretty familiar to lots of people of a certain generation, both in the UK and throughout the world.
Yeah. So, did you say Hull?
Hull, yes.
Oh, that's up north.
That is up north. Yes, I am from Yorkshire.
Right. Well, you obviously lost your accent. Must have been in prep school.
No, I'm a product of comprehensive school and proud of it. No prep school here, mate. Yeah, Hull's divided into two parts, kind of the part with the big accent and the part without a big accent. And I'm from the west side, which doesn't have the broad Hull accent. But I've obviously sort of like toned it down for the hallowed recording of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast anyway. But yeah, no, so from Yorkshire, from Hull, and that's where a lot of my wargaming was done until I moved down to London in 2000, and I happenstanced to sort of live with my wife and kids in St Albans. And I was looking through the internet one day thinking, there's a war games club in St Albans. And there must be. It's a really big town. And there's this guy in the on the internet, Richard Clark. Oh, well, yeah, his name's listed. His name's listed with the War Games. I better give him a ring. And then I was subjected to perhaps the most intense grilling for 30 minutes on the phone by Rich as to who I was, why I was ringing him, and was I a true war gamer? And he sort of said, what games do you play? What scales are they? And what rules do you use? Unfortunately, I must have, either I said the right thing, or he thought I was such an idiot that it'd be good to have somebody around the club to laugh at. That he invited me over to Lard Island, and 20 years later, almost still there, still being laughed at, and still not really having a clue what I'm doing. But there we go. That's wargaming for you.
Yes, that man has an awful lot to. Well, we have to thank him, I think, for bringing you forward, because otherwise you could just be a poor lonely Sir Sidney.
Yes. Yeah. Without the insults rained on me by all members of the club and Richard in particular, I'd just be sad and lonely sitting just on my own, not being made fun of. Yeah, you've really sold that to me. Thank you so much.
That's okay.
A poor unsuspecting youth arrives at Lard Island, and have you ever recovered?
Not really. In a lot of ways, it was one of the things which anyone who was sort of wargaming, maybe back in the 80s and the 90s, will remember is that rules used to be very detailed. They were kind of objective, and they had lots of charts and loads of figures and ratios, and you used to add up this and subtract that. And that was the way that I used to play Wargames Research Group rules and New Brew rules and Tercio, which is a set of Renaissance rules. Now, that is not in any way an insult to those rules or the people who play them, because I used to have fantastic fun doing it. But when I joined the club in St Albans with Rich and Nick and the other people, it's a Lard Island regulars, they had just a different way of looking at rules and wargaming, and I just loved it, and as indeed a lot of people do. And they were rules which were really focused on history and rule mechanics, and not so much completely dominated by just objectively adding up factors on a chart. And it was really clicked for me and really helped me develop what games I wanted to play, because they were sort of kind of talking my language. So it's been a great time there. And I better stop, otherwise I'm going to say something nice about Richard and Nick, and I can never do that publicly. But that was really the big change in my wargaming life about 20 years ago, was actually moving clubs. Didn't want to move down to London, and I still obviously do play WRG games as well, but certainly the Too Fat Lardy type of rules are ones that I've taken to heart.
Okay, so Sid, it's time to spill the beans. I mean, is it a case of when you're at Lard Island, you're just constantly forced into playtesting?
Oh, thanks a lot, Neil. That's already straying onto the awkward questions. It was either that or asking you which was your favourite Flames of War bolt action. obviously bolt action. Obviously bolt action. There's only one answer to that, isn't there? Yes. We do play other games apart from games that are Lard games, but they are kept off Twitter.
Yeah, okay.
That's not entirely true. We do actually sort of post photos of them, but we tend to sort of develop the rules that we're working on. Although I think a couple of times I've sort of done games which have had published rules by other people, just to sort of test them against whatever mechanics we're using or whatever thought process we're doing. But the sort of the rubbish that I put on is normally of an odd period. So I tend to sort of try and write the rules myself, or use the rules Rich has been writing, and we fiddle around with them at the edges. So it does have a flavour of a game's rules developing environment, as opposed to just rocking up with whatever flavour of the month it is which has been published. And there's pros and cons of both of those approaches, I guess.
Yes.
Yes. So, what is your favourite period?
That's a very good question. I guess, like a lot of war games, I played everything sometimes, and I will actually play anything. So whatever the game is, I just want to take part, and I'm very happy to do that. Over the years, I've had different periods I've really, really enjoyed. If you'd asked me about 5 years ago, I'd probably say First World War. I was very interested in that as a historical period and wargaming it. I had a long period of time doing things like Ancients, but the period I've gone back to time and time again, I'm on the third time of visiting, has really been the late 17th century in general, but certainly the late 17th century, which has got to be my favourite period. I did that in the late 80s, and I did it again in the early 2000s, and since 2015 I've really been focusing on that, as people might see on the blog that I put together. And I just love the period. It's a huge amount of depth. The history of the time is really interesting, and it's also one of those periods which has a revolution in the middle of it, sometimes called the military revolution, rightly or wrongly, but it's a time when you've got real changes in the way that wars are being fought, armies are being organised, and what's happening on the battlefield. And I think that really gives the period a lot of character and a lot of interest, and has the benefit as well of being a period that not that many people game all the time, and I like trying to open that up to a bit more publicity than it might otherwise have received, and that's certainly something I enjoy, and hoping that people give it a try as well and get the same enjoyment as I did from it.
Yeah. So is this around the sort of 30 Years' War period?
Well, yeah. So certainly done the 30 Years' War, and that's earlier in the 17th century. From 1618, the English Civil War, another sort of really popular 17th century period. But the wars I'm really interested in are the war which gets called the Dutch Wars, 1672 to 78, and also the 9 Years' War, 1688 to 1697, sometimes called the League of Arensberg. And those are the big wars of the French expansion, when they fight a European coalition. So it's Louis XIV against the rest, basically. And there's a couple of other really interesting wars in the 17th century, like the French Fronde, which is in Louis XIV's minority, which has a lot of interesting actions in. And there's a couple of other sort of conflicts which are happening in Europe at the same time, like the First Great Northern War. And all of those together aren't that well known, partly because there's no really large English armies or British armies fighting, at least until the 9 Years' War. And that means that, English historians haven't really focused on those periods. So you've got very significant battles and fates of European nations being determined without really great sort of the equivalent English histories that you get for the Peninsular War, the 7 Years' War. And that makes it interesting trying to find information in places that you wouldn't normally look. And I've always been one to enjoy a challenge, so trying to sort of marry up that history research with creating gameable periods has been one of the real flavours of what I've been interested in doing for a long time.
Excellent.
So is that the period that you have your most figure collections for?
Yeah.
Do you
probably.
have a particular favourite? Do you have a particular favourite army? Do you have lots of them?
No, I'm not a huge collector. I've got quite a few over the years, obviously, but I'm not somebody who's got tens of thousands of figures. I've got figures for all periods, I guess, but the armies that I have built up have really been for the 17th century, or maybe for the Great War, some Napoleonics as well. So favourite army, that's a really good question. It's probably the French army of Louis XIV, which I think is just a really interesting army to look at. It's very attractive. There's uniforms and flags, and there's a variety of different forces comprised within the army. And the way the army fights, I think, is fairly interesting and revolutionary, certainly in the 1670s and 1680s. So that would probably be my favourite army. And I'm on the second time. So there's one army I've got already in 28mm, and I'm really in the process of painting up a second army in 28mm, and the interval between them being about 20 years. So that's quite interesting, looking at the painting styles changing over that time. But, if you enjoy something once, it doesn't mean to say that you can't do it a second time. And I've often thought that wargaming is really about friendships, ultimately, and it's about games with friends. And those games, for me, have always really focused on scenarios. And it's not so much that I want to collect in different periods, because I think that if you get the scenarios right and the rules right, you can really play an amazingly wide scope of scenarios in just one period. And although, people, obviously war games, butterflies of one complexion or another, but I think if you find a period you really love and you create the scenarios for that period which really work and you get immersed in it, you can just about do any game. You look through those old books by Charles Grant, tabletop teasers, 52 teasers in one of those books of program war game scenarios or whatever it used to be called. And I think each one of those just about can be adapted for a particular period. And that's something I've really tried to do, is just focus on one period at a time for a number of years and really try and get immersed in that and create some really memorable games.
What's that like?
it can be hard to commit to. It's great when I'm coming on here and waffling about this and I'm running off and buying Cruel Seas or something like that. It's good. You should try, Mike.
No, that's overrated, mate. By all.
I don't know, it just sounds, I don't know, it just sounds completely alien, but
Logical.
slightly fascinating.
Absolutely logical, and I can see the sense of it, and concentrate on actually learn something about a particular period of time. And
it also helps if you don't have a huge amount of time. So my kids have, they're getting to teenagers now, but obviously they have been growing up to get to that point. And also commute from my home to work, and that takes a bit of time every day. If you don't have a huge amount of time, and if you're a slow painter, and I'm not a quick painter, certainly, it suited me to try and just focus on one thing at a time. Again, like an alien concept.
I don't understand it.
Yeah. And of course, the last thing that some people may know you from, because obviously for the last 18 months or so, you of course have been the host of the Oddcast.
That's right. So I'm picking.
So how did that come about then?
How did that come about? I think mainly we thought that your show was so wonderful. That we just wanted to do something which was a bit different. I think we just like talking about wargaming, history and rules, and we thought, rather than just waffling on in a pub, let's just do it on the air and see what people make of it. And it kind of grew from there. I think that we also wanted to try and give a sort of slightly different slant to your show and Jay's show and the other various shows. And obviously there's a lot of shows on podcasts on role playing as well as wargaming, just to try and give a slightly different slant, to try and focus it on particular sort of historical things we were trying to draw out in the gaming. That was really the idea behind it, and to try and link that in with how we represent history in sets of rules, such as the ones that Nick and Rich write. And that was the idea behind doing a podcast. And we really only meant to do 3 or 4. And I remember us saying, let's just knock off a couple and then try do another weekend, and then we'll stop there. But we enjoyed it, and people seem to have a bit of spare time on their hands and listen to it. It's been nice going to the shows when people have sort of come up and said, that one wasn't as bad as the one before. So well done. You're sort of getting better.
Well, I must admit, I mean, obviously, you two gentlemen in real life are great orators in your various professions. And I just want to say, just having, what are you, 14 episodes now, isn't it? I'm gutted how sickeningly good you all are. Because to be honest, mate, it is brilliant. I've really. It's a fabulous listen. I almost feel that you're slumming it coming on here, because here you are, the three of you having great intellectual conversations and discussing history and book recommendations, and especially some of the stuff you found on your bookshelf over the years. Good grief! And then you're slimming it coming on here.
Well, you see, Mike, I told you, that £50 I gave to Neil before the show was well spent. I did say to you, Mike, we needed more than 20 quid. 50 quid, well spent. There you go. It's very kind of that recommendation, Neil. The check is in the post. It's very kind of you to say all of that, to be honest. I mean, the book reviews, I think, that people have enjoyed, and it's always good to have amusing book reviews, which were, of course, mine, because they're something which, people just can laugh at and make fun of. But I think, wargamers are great readers. That's the one thing I think through every country in the world, played wargamers all around the world, Australians, New Zealanders, Americans, Canadians, Europeans. I mean, they are all great readers, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing that I've met. Every wargamer I've met from any walk of life has also been a great reader. And I think that books are a huge, huge part of the wargaming hobby. So that's the part of the show I really enjoy. So I'm pleased you pick up on that. And thank you very much for the very kind words.
And before we move on, I just have one final question. Are you ever going to reveal what Rich actually bought you for Christmas?
But if you are, this is the place to do it.
I think what was on the Christmas show stays on the Christmas show.
But I think, whilst we're talking about the Oddcast, we do need to sort of stress what I think is the most important part of that show, which is the music. And I think, it is the music of Roger Barraclough and his band that personally, for me, makes that show. The rest of it is just mindless waffle. But
music's good, isn't it? The music and the little intros and outros.
Beautiful, yeah.
How on earth you managed to ship the Wurzels down to St Albans to perform, especially for the show? I'm massively impressed.
It's impressive stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, and in fact, we have invited Roger and his band onto the show today, but they haven't turned up.
Oh no! Well, if your booking agent just isn't in with the band, Mike. Well, it's difficult, isn't it? You've got to make sure that these people are looked after. I mean, I know it's as I said, as bunkers go, it's not bad, but it's not really sort of top-notch green room entertainment, is it?
He did say
Roger doesn't turn up just for sort of a couple of packs of Doritos and a sort of can of Tizer. Come on, Mike.
It was a cold can of Tizer. It's been in the motel all afternoon.
I was going to say, after be cold. We haven't turned the heating on yet.
Or maybe he'll be there by the end of the show. Let's hope so.
We could always hope, but I think he might be outside trying to get across the moats. But those crocodiles might slow him down a bit.
Very good.
Thank you for lovely to have that introduction, Sidney. Hopefully, people have a bit more of an idea of who on earth it is that we are talking to.
Because we haven't.
And so, on that note, what we'll do, we will take a quick break, and when we come back, it is time once again to enter the confessional. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is very proud to be sponsored by the multi-award-winning Two Fat Lardies. In the recent Wargames Illustrated Awards, they were recognised no less than 3 times. Best Game of 2018, Chain of Command. Best New Game of 2018, Water Tanker. And were also recognised for their level of customer service. This award means that Chain of Command has actually won Best Game for 2 years running. And to celebrate this, Two Fat Lardies are running an award-winning sale on their website, with copies of the rules for Chain of Command, Sharp Practice, Water Tanker and Dux Britanniarum all reduced. So, if you have just the rules themselves, or perhaps a bundle including campaign books or scenario expansions, check out the Two Fat Lardies website at twofatlardies.co.uk. And whilst you're there, why not pick up a copy of the Lard 2018 magazine, a publication packed with scenarios, campaigns, articles, interviews and reports. And then don't forget to check out Lard Island News, where Rich has posted a series of articles about creating your own jungle terrain. Award-winning rules, inspiring blog posts, and great spare time reading. You can find it all on the Two Fat Lardies website, twofatlardies.co.uk. Play the period, not the rules. Dearly beloved, we are once again gathered in order to celebrate what we've been purchasing, because the luff is nowhere to be seen. Way! Excellent stuff. Okay, so it is that time, of course, in the show where we chat about what on earth we have that has fallen off those wobbly shelves, both real and virtual, and what we've managed to catch before it's hit the floor. So, who shall go first on this particular evening? Shall I go first and show you people how it's done?
Go on.
Oh, please do.
Oh,
I feel a challenge.
Well, I mean, you know, here's Mike who's been glorying in the fact that I haven't bought a miniature for days, weeks even, and you know, I mean, it's just not the same. It really isn't the same.
18 days, mate. 18 days I managed. It's a world record for me.
It's massively impressive, mate. I really do hope, though, that you've fallen off the wagon big time since then.
Oh, hugely.
Excellent stuff. Well, yeah, I mean, other than the odd fail of a board game, I wasn't doing massively badly. And then, it's all that Mr. McCullough's fault. Because if you hadn't written this new set of rules, I wouldn't have suddenly thought, hang on a minute, that looks interesting, but I haven't got any figures for Rangers of Shadow Deep. So I'm going to have to look out to see if I can get some. So it has to be said, over the last couple of weeks, my figure collection has been somewhat eclectic, but it has a theme, because mostly it's been everything you need for the first couple of scenarios from the Rangers of Shadow Deep book. So what have we got? We've had Frostgrave Soldiers, the plastic box set of Frostgrave Soldiers, because that kind of seems to be a nice generic, you know, kind of fantasy characters. I was really surprised, actually, potentially how difficult it is to get hold of D&D characters, D&D figures. Or maybe I'm just looking in the wrong place. But I was surprised, if you look for 28mm human ranger, there's a few around, but they were less than what I expected, I must admit. And so I thought, you know what, I'll go for something a little bit more, generic. And actually, the Frostgrave Soldiers look good, especially if you paint them in different colours. And it's quite interesting. I don't know if you've seen the North Star do a Merry Men add-on pack for it to convert them into figures for gaming, like Sheriff of Nottingham. But even just the paint jobs they've got on that particular page just shows you what you can do if you just think a little bit outside of the box of what was normally a Frostgrave figure. Anyway, so I got some of those, and then it was like, I'm one of those strange people who don't own any zombies. Well, correction, I don't own any fantasy zombies. I own some kind of sci-fi ones, thanks to Mantic, but I don't own any fantasy zombies, so I had to try and find some fantasy zombies without wanting to buy a particular horde. Because it seems that most people, if you want to buy zombies, they're either massively expensive or in metal. Like, I mean, the other world zombies are really nice, but I didn't necessarily want to pay 11 quid for 3. I'm not knocking the fact that it's 11 for 3, but I'm thinking they're zombies. I don't necessarily want to pay a massive amount for them. And it wasn't until, actually, because Mantic do a zombie box set, but you get 40 zombies. I'm thinking, I don't want 40 zombies.
No, you want 8.
Yeah. So, but I mean, luckily they do this little pack tacked onto the bottom of their fantasy range, which includes 10 zombies, 10 ghouls, and some of them are Nedra gravestones. And it was like, oh, sold on that, great stuff. Giant rats. Ended up picking some of the Reaper Bones giant rats up because they're like $2.50 for 6.
Cool.
And kind, oh, that's a decent price, and they're not bad. I mean, they're not a patch on the Otherworld ones. I look at the Otherworld giant rats and thought, oh, they're really nice. And funny enough, even the Frostgrave giant rats are really nice, but I was thinking more on a bit of a budget on that, so I got the Reaper Bones ones. But then, having taken Mr. Randall to task for not making use of his other figure collections, when he went out and bought a load of plastic spiders, I then went out and bought spiders myself as well, because I found some really nice ones. Right, WizKids do a range of plastic miniatures for D&D. And these are the range that, according to the packaging, become basically pre-undercoated with Vallejo paint. In big letters, it says. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, so, well, great, they're undercoated. It would have been really nice if they were cleaned up first. So never mind. But these spiders look really nice, and I'm thinking, they're surely not that nice in person. And actually, they are. And I've been, I was up at my, our good friends, Mr. Peaks the other week, and, funny enough, he had some of these, which he got from, I think it was Element Games, actually, because he suddenly discovered that Element Games was only around the corner from where he worked.
Oh dear.
Yeah, that's what he said. And apparently they've got a load of these in, and I was, as I say, I am, because I was expecting them to be a lot softer plastic than what they are, because I was expecting them to be very much like Reaper Bones, and they're not. They were harder plastic, and actually, they're pretty decent figures. I was quite impressed with them. But these spiders are fantastic, and it's like, and you get 3 for $4.50, and they're kind of like 35 mil across the legs. You also get, in each pack, you get like a victim that's in a web, and you get a pool of, it almost looks like poison bile or something. It's something vaguely horrible. So if you get spiders that spit poison or something, you've got a marker for that as well. And I was massively impressed. So I got some of that. So I got some of those as well. And so I've been buying loads of bits and pieces to do these first couple of scenarios from Rangers of Shadow Deep. And then finally the Outtro Miniatures Kickstarter turned up at the start of this week, actually, I think it was. Oh my word, they're pretty. These it's the latest range of stuff for boas and badgers.
Yeah.
And included in it are these, because a couple of the figures were quite large. He'd done a badger mage and a beaver mercenary. And because they were pretty big, they decided that they would cast them in resin as opposed to metal. Now, the thing Michael does is that he sculpts to ensure that everything he does is a one-piece casting, which is especially this day and age. I mean, that's a skill in itself. Crikey. Yeah. But I tell you, these resin figures are just awesome. I mean, Oathsworn figures generally are good, are really good, but these two resin figures are something else. I think Gareth might have even, our mate Gareth might have even painted his beaver already. Because I think I thought I saw it on Twitter the other day, but it's stunning, absolutely stunning. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. I've been buying loads of fantasy figures. A Kickstarter turned up. So that's me.
Wow. Sid, would you like to go next?
I can go next. Yeah. Well, I can't compete with a load of spiders, but it was funny you mentioning about Rangers, Neil. I don't know if you ever come across Midland Miniatures. They've got a very nice range of sort of classic role-playing adventure figures.
Yes.
And although I said, well, yeah, I'm kind of just do one period, I have been... two things have led me to Midland Miniatures. I bought some of their figures before, and they're absolutely great. They're very flash-free, and they're nice, classic, proportioned figures in a sort of a role-playing, fantasy role-playing sort of style. So two things. So I bought the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition rule book from Cubicle 7, which brought back a lot of memories. And we've been doing a couple. I haven't really had a lot of time over Christmas and New Year, but we did a game. I did a game with the kids, and they really liked it. A very brief game, very sort of like just something very, very straightforward. So my daughter and my son both liked it, and I thought, well, I'm going to get some figures, and they can mess around with those next time, and that might be quite fun. And they can pick their own figure and they can paint their own figure. I don't really care what they look like as long as they have fun. And we went to the Midland Miniatures website and we bought some of their adventurers. I bought some of the winter adventurers because I thought that they looked really nice, actually. And my daughter picked out the Magic User and my son bought, goodness knows what he bought, but he bought some other stuff as well. So that's one thing that we've been buying. And I've always been a bit reticent to sort of share the hobby with the kids because you don't want to be one of those parents who sort of says, well, this is what you should be doing. This is going to be a hobby. So I've always been a bit hands off, but I have really enjoyed introducing them to things like role playing in a very sort of, you might like to have a go at this kind of way. But they seem to enjoy it. So that's been very positive so far. And I've really, really enjoyed doing that. So Midland Miniatures, I thought were, a really nice company. I have had some of the figures before, but this is the first sort of purchase I've made, which is a number of their sort of like classic sort of fantasy figures, as opposed to figures that I can just put into the 17th century. They do a very good beggar. If anyone ever wants somebody who's begging for alms with a little bowl, they do a wonderful figure of that. So I bought some of those.
Can I ask you a question on those?
Sure.
Because I was looking at those. Now, but I've had, because I had, what did I get from them? I think I got a dwarf figure from them a while ago, because I know Mr. Hickman, I think, has bought a load of halflings from them, and they're lovely. But I bought a dwarf, and it was one of the most undwarf-like dwarfs I'd bought, I think. And so I must admit, looking back at them now, I'm kind of thinking I was a little bit reticent to try them. Now, what sort of figure scale are they? Are they larger 28s, or are they kind of almost like nearer the old classic 25mm?
They are more, I think they're more the classic 25mm. So the figures I'm painting up at the moment, I've been for a while, they are the sort of the classic 25 to 28mm. They're not heroic scale 28mm. And the Midland figures fit perfectly with those. So I'd say that the Midland figures are around about sort of 26, 27, 28mm. They fit very well with Dixon's or War Games Foundry, fit very well with Perry's, but they're not the really super sort of chunky, maybe Crusader or some of the ones from North Star. But they're dwarves. The ones I've seen, they are. I know what you mean about being a bit undwarf-like. They're a little bit on the slim side for dwarves. They are sort of kind of chunky, but certainly the dwarf in the winter clothing wasn't. He was just like a small bloke who was a bit tubby, as opposed to a sort of a dwarf. And his beard was quite short. But I did think they were really nice figures. I kind of like my fantasy close to reality. So I don't know what the word is. It's something like sort of low fantasy or whatever it's called. I prefer that. So I like my dwarves looking, obviously dwarf-like, but still not that far off human size, and my hobbit's a bit smaller. So, and they're perfect for that. But they're not sort of like the Warhammer dwarves with Mohicans and stuff like that.
Cool.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I was curious because I kind of got that impression. And that was actually, because I know a couple of people suggested it when I was looking at adventures on Twitter, and that was the one reason that it kind of just like put me off just that a little bit, because with everything else I was getting, I was wondering, what's the scale like? So obviously with somebody who bought them, that's why I asked the question. Sorry to interrupt. Please carry on.
No, not at all. So I bought some of those. I'm coming off a fairly sort of intense sort of 6 weeks at work. I've been doing a project, almost finished it. I treated myself yesterday to some figures. So I bought a unit of French dragoons, mounted and dismounting from Dixon's, which is one of my favourite figure manufacturers for the period I do. So I bought some of those to be doing towards Easter. I bought a couple of books. I bought a very good book called The Grand Strategy of the Habsburg Empire by a guy called Mitchell Weiss. And this came out last year. And sort of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Habsburg Empire, just looks like, how on earth did they sort of survive for so long? This sort of chaotic sort of blob in the middle of Europe, and did they really know what they were doing? And it's been a really good read about, actually, despite being flanked on every side by enemies, they had a very skillful diplomacy of playing one off against the other and fighting the wars they wanted to fight at the times they wanted to fight them. So I thought that was a really interesting book. So I don't know if you do review books here sometimes, don't you? Anyway, so I know it's not a figure hobby purchase I can paint, but that was a good read. So that's what I've been doing over the last sort of month or so.
Cool. Okay, Mr. Hobbs, go for it.
Well, again, sit down, get yourself a drink. So,
drink of what, Mike? Drink of what?
Whatever your tipple is.
Right. I imagine you at this point in time sat in front of your microphone, kind of like crack your knuckles. It's like, right, okay, he's back.
I'm back. So, I fell off the wagon. I think I fell off the wagon towards the end of last podcast. We had Crusade a little while ago, about a week or so ago. So I went along there, met up with Jeff. Hello, Jeff. And
hello, Jeff.
And also Jeff. Hello, Jeff. The other Jeff doesn't listen. He doesn't listen to podcasts. So I don't know why I said that. A few others, and Simon was there. So hello, Simon from Swindon. And a lot of people. We had a great time. I did buy a few bits and a few bobs. So I literally walked into the gaming hall thinking, I'm going to have a look around before I buy anything. And the first stall I saw had the Battle Group rules there. So I picked up the Battle Group Spring Awakening supplement, which covers Hungary in 45, I think it was. Yeah. Really part of 45. Yeah. Which looked great. So I picked that up. Then walked around the corner, saw Matt and the lovely Debbie with a natter. Walked over to Tumbling Dice with Jeff, because Jeff wanted to buy a few more things. And they had a copy of Bloody Big Battles, which is a game system that Matt's been going on about.
Yeah.
Yeah, he uses it for his 2-mil gaming. And it covers the end of the sort of 19th century. So, ACW, Franco-Prussian War, Crimean possibly. And I've been trying to find it for a while, and they had it on the Tumbling Dice store, so obviously I had to buy that for research purposes only. I bought some planes off Tumbling Dice. And the Tumbling Dice do these little rule sets. You get a small rule set and a handful of planes for about a tenner. So I picked up Flames Above the Falklands.
Oh, that's a great game.
Is it? Cool. I haven't had a chance to open it yet. But
we did that at when I was at club in Coventry, and the guy who did it, who had the rules, went as far as to do a landscaping of of what's it sound? What was it called? Where the task force was anchored. And Falkland Sound or whatever it was, where they were anchored. And so we did the whole thing with Mirages and Sky Raiders, and we had ships and everything in the sand, and the rules will cater for everything. So yeah, we did the whole bit with an air raid over the Falklands. It was it's a cracking little set of rules, mate.
Yeah, they do look good. So I'm looking forward to having a look at those. I did that. Then I walked on the corner. Well, we did a bit. We went and saw Rich and Nick, and then after those, bumped into Simon, the banana guy, and he gave me a present. A while ago, I did a little demo game of Jugular for Simon and his mate Rich.
Yeah.
And Rich runs a little war games company, makes mats, and he does painting and stuff. And he gave me a mat, little 4x3 gaming mat, and it's sort of like teddy bear fur has been cut down really short and painted in all sorts of different colours. Really, really good quality. And he gave me that as a present, which is, really nice of him.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, so I've put some pictures up on Twitter, and what I'll do, I'm going to put up some pictures on my blog about that, with sort of links back to Rich's company and stuff. But yeah, that was really nice. So thanks, Rich, for that. So we did that. And then I found a stall by a company called Last Man, Last Bullet, which I haven't heard of before. But they do sort of resin stuff. And they had some lovely 20mm World War II resin emplacements. So they had like sort of tank traps and things like that. But they also had the almost sort of the Maginot Line pop-up armored gun emplacements, which we used by France and sort of Belgium and into the Low Countries. I thought, that's quite nice. So I thought, I'll get one of those to have a little play with it. And the guy who ran it went, have a look at this. This is what we do. It's a little box set, and it's got sort of like 6 machine gun emplacements in there, and a couple of big anti-tank emplacements, and the big pop-up one. He said, which he did. I looked at it, I thought, that'd be really nice for doing something for my Belgian forces.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. So I bought that. So and then I sort of looked at there was the big Belgian raid on Fort Iban ML, or when the Fallschirmjägers landed, and I thought that'd make a great scenario. And then read about it and worked out that the Fallschirmjägers landed on top, walked out, placed some charges on the turret, blew it all to hell, and it was all over in half an hour. So I thought maybe that will make an interesting scenario for Chain of Command. But there was also a few battles around some bridges quite close by. So I'm going to do a bit of investigation into that and just see what I can find about those actions. I thought, I've got some replacements now. I've got the troops. It might be nice to do a little Chain of Command scenario based around that sort of attack into Belgium. So, yeah, so that was Crusade. So that was the Saturday after we last recorded. What else have we got? Oh, I bumped into Guy as well. So I said hello to Guy. So Guy Powers. And then I went home. Oh, well, we went out for a few drinks. A quiet drink with Rich and Nick and Johan and Fraser and a few others.
A quiet drink with Rich and Nick? Well, a quiet drink with Rich. Is there such a thing?
It started quiet. So,
how did it finish?
Hazy. It was definitely hazy. That's not what we're here to talk about. back to the confessional. I'll probably just confess about that night. Since then, I've bought Rangers of Shadow Deep because we played 3 games of it now, which I'll come on to later. Picked that up. I picked up a humble bundle. So humble bundle is a site that does these bundles of PDFs you can buy, role-playing ones, and they had one for Numenera. Which is
for what? Sorry?
Numenera. It's a game I've heard spoken about in hushed tones, and I don't know much about it. But the bundle was so cheap. I just thought, well, I'll have a look at it. There's lots of people saying it's a really good game, interesting background, completely different to most role-playing games. So I picked up that bundle. I also picked up the Call of Cthulhu starter set by KFC, because I like a starter set, and so I got that. And actually, Sid, what you were saying about playing games with your children, and you tried Warhammer.
Yeah.
There is a Warhammer starter set coming out very, very soon.
There is, and it looks splendid. So I pre-ordered that, and you get the PDFs from Cubicle 7 in advance of printing. I think it's only just gone to the printers, and it does look really, really nice. And again, for kids or people who are new to the hobby, it's something that is really great because just play it up out the box, and they've done it in a beautiful sort of way as well. That they've got information which is relevant only for your own character printed on the sheets, and they've got a special foldy sort of thing that you don't reveal that to anyone else who's playing. So it's that's looking a really nice product.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with all these starter sets that you see now for role playing games, because I mean they're usually under £20, so they're reasonable price. You get a cut down version of the rules usually, but you get the scenarios in there, you get all the player characters. It's straight out of the box and play it. And it's a great way to dip your toe in and have a go at a game. So, yes. What else have I bought? I popped into Firestone just to see them. Walked out with the new Lord of the Rings Gondor book. And
you really did fall off the wagon big time, didn't you?
Yeah. And a couple of figures. They had the 3 hunters there, so I picked that up. And the final thing that I bought was I've been looking at my desk, and my desk is a bit messy, so I bought some of the War Bases paint holders for Villagios. I got a few Villagios, not many, but they're I can never find the right colour. So when I popped in to see Ralph in November, he had one of those on his desk, and I thought, oh, that looks good. So they're £7 each. So I picked that up, and I picked up a little sort of box shelf unit for paints and things. So I'm going to redo my desk when all that arrives, and I've assembled it and just sort my desk out a bit. That makes some space.
Yes, because it isn't quite neat enough.
No.
Because you turn around and say your desk is messy, and you take a photo of it, and to most people, your painting desk is a vision of organisation.
It's nice, it's good, but it could be better. And I think that's the thing we need to remember. Never rest on your laurels.
Okay. Excellent stuff. Oh! I forgot to mention I had some. I had some paint from Foundry turn up. It was I'd ordered some of their flesh sets.
Yes.
And yes, I do. Yeah, I'd have to give a quick shout out to the guys at Foundry. I don't know if they listen to the show, but if they don't, what they included as I believe that normally Foundry always includes some sort of leaflet about painting. And the one they sent to me happened to include a nice little pamphlet on how to paint horses. Thanks, chaps. Yes, all will become clear. Obviously, if you're a regular listener to the show, you know exactly where I'm coming from on this one.
Oh yeah.
But thank you, gentlemen. Right, okay. I know we spent some time, but just before we finish, just want to ask the question: was there anything kind of shiny or new or otherwise that may have caught your eye?
Yes.
Go on, Mike.
I'll tell you what. I'll go first.
It's not just me saying.
This isn't. This isn't new. This isn't new. But and again, this is Mr. Slade's fault. I hope you're listening, Matt. Ever since our visit to Slade Towers and Glenbrook Games, where we played To the Strongest War of the Roses, you may well have infected Mr. Hickman and myself with the bug to do War of the Roses. It's something that had been on the back burner for a while. And of course, we were talking. We've been talking about it previously by doing it in a sensible scale. 6 mil.
No, 28.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. The other week, I was asked by Mr. Hickman to say, he says, I've been thinking about this War of the Roses thing. So I said, okay, well, funny you should say that. Here, have this army list. And then I was informed in no uncertain terms that that if we were doing this, I was going to be Lancastrian. I don't have a choice in that, apparently. Thank you, Mr. Hickman. Anyway, but we then, yes, we've, as you may expect, 6 mil has become 28 mil, and we have been gazing longingly at Perry's. So, I suspect before too long we are going to have something of an unfortunate accident between the two of us, because we've been working out, okay, what exactly do we need for a standard, for a To the Strongest Force of War of the Roses? And it's like, you can get away. I was like, you can get away with 3 plastic box sets for your kind of rank and file. And it's like, yeah, but you just don't want that. Yeah, but there's so. Because that's the great thing with War of the Roses, isn't it? There are so many other little units you can have, and the Perry War of the Roses range is really nice. So yeah, that is likely to be. It may not be pretty.
Could I make a suggestion? Buy one box between the two of you of the plastics, split it, paint them up, and see if you enjoy painting them. And if you do, buy some more. And if you don't, bin it and move on to the next project. Instead of going out and buying everything and then gazing at the huge pile of plastic going, I can never do all of these. And then getting yourself worked up and not doing it.
Who are you and what have you done with Mr. Hobbs?
That's what I always do. I always buy a small sample. Whenever I get into a new project, buy one box, try it out. If I don't like it, I send it to Gareth to paint.
How about you, Sidney? Is there anything bright and shiny on your horizon?
Not so much figure-wise. There's a couple of books coming out later in this year, and I was just thinking about what is on my horizon. You might have heard on the Oddcast there was a book that I recommended about drawing your own maps.
Oh, yes.
A really, really good book, which I'll take the opportunity to recommend here again. A couple of people contacted me offline to ask about it, so I'm pleased to sort of talk about it a bit more here. I think wargamers love maps, and they're all pretty useful as well, unsurprisingly, because campaigns and battles and whatever it is. So there's a book that I was bought a while ago by a guy called Jared Blando, and the book was called How to Draw Fantasy Art and RPG Maps, and it's a really, really good book. I think a lot of the art in it is actually done on the computer, but he does demonstrate how you can actually physically do maps and make them very attractive by drawing shields and how to draw towns and villages and stuff like that. So that's how to draw fantasy art and RPG maps. That's the book which is out, but he's also got a book which is coming out, and it's called Fantasy Map Maker: How to Draw RPG Cities for Gamers and Fans. Mm-hmm. And I think that looks really nice. It's on Amazon at the moment. It's supposed to be about 17 quid. It's not out until the middle of the year, but that's certainly one thing I've got my eye on, and it's in my Amazon wish list. But apart from that, I'll come on to it maybe a bit later, but I'm looking at some of the Langton 1200th scale ships. We did some last year.
Oh, Sid. No, Sid, no.
They're very, yeah, it's a bit of a love-hate thing, really, because they're very attractive, but the rigging is quite difficult. At least I've found the rigging quite difficult, but they do look very nice when they're done. But one of the smaller scale projects that I'm looking at the moment has a naval dimension. So in addition to the ones I did for the Siege of Portsmouth last year, I was thinking of getting some more Langton ships from the Anglo-Dutch range. No doubt more of that in due course in the next segment.
How about you, Mr. Hobbs?
Well, the only thing that's tempting me at the moment is something that we discussed, Mr. Shuck. And that's Zombicide Black Plague.
Yes.
Now, the reason for this is one, you started talking about medieval style zombies. And I thought, ooh, yeah. And then I started looking at it, the thing is, I haven't really got a multiplayer cooperative game
right
in my bookshelf, or my game shelf. I've got lots of two-player games, got a few four-player games. I've got lots of games where you fight against each other. I haven't got anything sort of cooperative, so I really don't fancy the classic zombie side, because that's modern and just bores me. But I sort of read up on Zombicide, the Black Plague one, and I just thought, it sounds a little bit interesting. And everyone I spoke to said, yeah, it's great, it's got lots of character. Apart from one little voice, and that one little voice is something I really, really trust. You said it's a bit,
Yeah, but you can't. Yeah, but you can't trust what he says all the time. Yeah. Funny enough, I played it. I played it with Mr. Peak, not this time round, but the last time I visited the Peakatorium. Funny enough, it was later on in the day after the opening ceremony, and we had a game in the evening, and it's CMON, isn't it? So I mean. The miniatures are really nice. The production values are excellent. But
it didn't grab you, did it?
It didn't grab me at all. No, it has to be said, it didn't grab me at all. Having said that, I do hold my hands up and kind of go, I'm not a huge fan of zombie games.
Yeah.
So that might have coloured my judgment. But having said, as I say, the production values and all the gumph you get in the game, you can't fault it. But the gameplay itself, I don't know. I mean, it's something I'm thinking. Maybe it's a case I'm being too harsh. I need to give it another chance. I know a lot of people think it's great. But me, yeah. As I said, I think I just found it a little bit kind of meh.
So what I'm hearing from that, Neil, is you're saying that I should pick it up for research purposes, so you can try it again.
Research purposes.
It's amazing what you can do. It's amazing what you can do for research purposes.
It's all about the research.
Maybe you should try it sometime.
Yes, I mean, what you'll find, Sid, is on some podcasts, some superior podcasts, we do a lot of research. We like to research. I'm personally researching myself into bankruptcy, but it's it's for the listeners, Sid. It's for the listeners,
of course, with no personal gratification whatsoever.
No, at all.
The self-sacrifice in evidence is just, yeah.
I mean,
Noble.
we are noble people. Sid. Well, thanks for that, Neil. You've helped me there. I feel helped.
I'm just so glad that I have aided you in your decision making. And on that note, I think we should leave it there. Leave the confessional booth and let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll chat about what we've been playing and what's on our painting tables. Hi everyone, Neil here. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you are, I'm wondering, would you consider becoming a patron of the show? For as little as $1 a month, you can help support us in what we're doing with the show. For that, you can get access to a monthly question and answer show, and that will also allow you to ask questions. If you pledge more, you potentially get bonus podcasts. And you never know, you might even get invited to be on the show yourself. If you want to know more details, please follow the link to our Patreon page, which is on the front of the website. That's www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. Thanks a lot. Okay, it's that part of the show when we find out what we've been playing and maybe what we've been painting or building. As last time, I think I'll go first. Well, I'll start with what's on the paint desk, because what's on the paint desk is still what was on the paint desk last time. Bloody Normans. Bloody Normans. Okay, they're almost done. They're almost done. And if I didn't have to give my son a lift to work this week, they'd be finished by now. So the way, because the way life has kind of worked recently is that at the moment, I tend to work a slightly later shift at work, which means I don't normally have to be in work till between 10 and 10:30. Which gives you a nice little hour at the start of the day, where it's amazing what you can get done in an hour at the start of the day, especially once everybody else has gone out, has left the house. Mm. And so I was using that. I was using that for doing some painting and stuff. And I thought this week, the weekend, right, I'm into the final stretch. I was starting to get my basing done and everything. I thought, great. I've got a few little half hours, and I'll finish. I'll get them painted, flocked. They'll be done. Not quite. Almost there. Almost there. The only thing that's been on the hobby on the hobby table has been Normans, and I can tell you, I will be glad to see the back of these horses. I really will. Other than that, been playing loads of board games. I had a spectacular week, a few days where I ended up with, what was it? I think it was 5 days straight gaming, including a weekend where I was gaming for all day on both the Saturday and the Sunday, because I got invited. The aforementioned Mr. Peak at the Peakatorium, I was invited up there for the day. We were playing American football game up there, and sampling his wife's marvellous cooking. So it'd be rude not to go, wouldn't it? So I did that, and been dungeon bashes, a few other bits and pieces, things like 1066. Oh, Normans again, except I was playing as the Saxons and won. We had another go at Gloomhaven, and actually lost a scenario, which I was really pleased with, because I was thinking, this is getting far too easy. So it was actually nice to be in a situation where you're in a campaign and you actually lose a scenario. So that was because it said, it proves that the game, the game actually isn't just balanced so you just trog through scenarios and you seem to be completing them all. There is more of a challenge to it. So that was good. And quick shout out to Ian and the guys at Bash, Balls and Sauce Hobbies in Derby. I went up, myself and Josh actually went up to it was actually a Keyforge tournament we went up to a couple of Sundays ago. The great thing with Keyforge is that because of the way the game is, because essentially you buy this card deck and it's complete. That's it. There's no deck building. That's it. So they have this tournament format where basically everybody gets a brand new deck on the day, and you play with that deck, and then and effectively you just play a Dutch tournament, a Dutch style. As far as your format is concerned, but everybody's playing with a brand new deck. So you don't get you don't get issues with the kind of like CCG power gaming pay to win sort of thing that you may get in other systems. I had a great day. Came last. Which as I said to Mr. Mann at the time, basically means that I'm now 0 for 2 in the fact of actually both tournaments I have played in Derby, because the other one I played in Derby was actually at the sadly now defunct Galactic Models. I played next wing tournament, and then I played obviously this Keyforge tournament, and won the wooden spoon in both tournaments.
You've got a good collection of wooden spoons, haven't you?
I'm beginning to amass an excellent collection of wooden spoons. Well, with that, yes, because I also won the wooden spoon at the Saga tournament last year, didn't I?
Yep.
Yep. It's great coming last because they take pity on you and normally give you a prize. So it wasn't intentional me coming last, and especially when the last game, myself and Josh actually got drawn against each other. Yes. Yes, congratulations, Josh, for destroying your dad in the last round of that game. But yeah, great day. Bash do a fantastic job. They do a lot of organised play tournaments, and the guys up there have been doing a fantastic job. So shout out to them. So yes, lots and lots of gaming. It's been good. But no miniatures. Well, I say no miniatures games. Obviously some Dungeon Bash style stuff, but no actual kind of war game stuff done yet. Sorry, I tell a lie. Did a little bit of Gladiators. We've just started a campaign for Red Sand Blue Sky. We actually started that a couple of weeks ago. But that's the only kind of like, for want of a better phrase, proper miniatures game we've been doing. And I think the next one is likely to be Rangers of Shadow Deep. That's me. Sidney, how about you, sir? What have you been up to? What have you been playing? What have you been building?
Well, I've been building and painting more than I've been playing.
So are you a gamer painter or a painter gamer?
I think I'm probably about equal through inclination, but through circumstance, I'm more of a painter than a gamer. And that's basically because the club meets on a Tuesday night and I'm normally at work, which is a bit depressing. But I certainly really love wargaming when I can, but it tends to be more shows and events and the odd Tuesday I can make, and sometimes the weekend, to be honest. So I've not done a great deal of gaming, but I have been doing building and painting, certainly over the last 3 or 4 months. And just generally sort of building stuff up. Various sort of units have been had on the go. I was supposed to be taking part in a painting challenge, but unfortunately I got this project in from work about the day I was supposed to be starting painting for that, and that didn't really go very well. But certainly before Christmas, finished off a couple of regiments of infantry, a couple of regiments of horse, and this is for late 17th century. So one of the things I like doing is converting as well, and find that quite relaxing, looking at figures. And most of the figures I use are metal figures. There are no real plastic figures available for the period I'm doing. And part of the fun is sort of lopping off arms and heads and swapping them round with other heads and arms and doing bits of green stuff. I find that quite relaxing and quite fun, almost thinking about the figures as as the starting point, and then trying to convert them into something else. And I was doing a bit of that this weekend. That was good fun. I'm halfway through a unit of French hussars for 1688. There weren't many French hussars around there. In fact, they weren't even French at all. They were Croats, who were sort of refugees and stragglers and deserters. And they've been fun to do, and I've been converting those up. So that's kind of me at the moment. I did really enjoy the role playing, which I mentioned earlier. Not really wargaming, but that was Warhammer Fantasy Role Playing. That was a good looking book. And I'm looking forward to when my work project is finished on the 15th of February, getting back into more games. And I think that's probably going to be things like Chain of Command, to be honest, which I'm sure all your listeners will know all about. But so doing a bit of painting, fair amount of converting, and looking forward to finishing work things to get back properly gaming.
Well, cool. So how do you sculpt lace out of green stuff?
Well, you don't. I think the trick is partly a sort of an old painter's trick. You don't try and sculpt lace. You try and sculpt something which looks like lace when you paint it from about a couple of feet away. You're really trying to sculpt a representation of something which looks really fiddly and really fussy. So you can easily sort of get the flow of the material through a sculpting tool, and then obviously using a pin to sort of make the impression that what's there is actually lace. So you can actually do quite a lot, which isn't really recreating the actual thing, but you just kind of make it look as if it is the thing on the figure that you're trying to represent. And a good paint job or a half decent paint job does an amazing amount of lifting of a figure. So that's the answer. I hope.
Figure conversion is still something that kind of strikes fear and trepidation into me. So hats. Cause I know you mentioned before how much you like to convert your figures and stuff. And so hats off to you, mate. I mean, it's not something I must admit I would go to very often.
It's one of those things which is a bit of a labour of love, and if you want to, and it does help if you're doing a period, so you've got large figures that you can convert, and it probably helps if you're not painting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of figures as well, because obviously if you're converting every one, it does slow it down. But it does allow you to create the actual figure units that you want to have on the table, as opposed to pestering a sculptor and saying, well, I really want you to do these figures with some particular sort of caps or hats on. So being able to do that is good. I mean, I'm not a sculptor by any means of any sort of quality, but even the stuff that you can do with just an old set of sculpting tools and a bit of imagination, you give the figures that personal touch, which I think is like really important whenever you're gaming with them. Wargaming is an aesthetic hobby, and I think the more you sort of make your army unique to you, the more fun you're going to have, whether you're winning or you're losing, to be honest.
Indeed. Wise words from Mr. Roundwood there. Sir, his lordship Roundwood.
How about you then, Hobbs? What have you been up to?
Well, Neil, I think we should take a walk down to my workshop at this point.
Have you got a sound of
Why not?
You got a sound of a buzzsaw then?
It depends if Neil can find one in time. So yes, let's go to the workshop. So, what I've been doing at my work area, 20mm World War II has been a big thing over the last couple of weeks. Been painting up some German tanks which have been sort of sat around for ages, and some Belgian stuff, and carrying on the basing of all those Belgians and Germans I got. She's still ongoing because I'm getting to the fiddly one now, and I'm putting those off. So yeah, lots of World War II 20mm stuff. Then we move back, Neil, in time to Napoleonic period, 1812. I've been doing my 2mm Russians.
Oh right, okay.
So I've finished off all of the regiments for the first battle I'm going to do. I'm just now doing the artillery trains and the sort of camp areas. So I've got another order with irregular miniatures winging its way to me, with another few hundred tents and wagons. so I can do a lot more sort of campsites and things. And I've been doing some 2mm terrain again. So I don't know if you actually mentioned this, but I've sort of saved it off for the Meeples challenge, which we've sort of forgotten about over the last 4 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, my 2mm terrain. So I've been using. I tend to use old CDs because I got lots of them, usually with various versions of Linux on them. So I use those, and I'll be making up some forests. I'm making my own pine trees using these sort of cone-shaped glass beads and flock and paint and stuff, and yeah, just enjoying that. So I've made another 3 forested areas, which I'm going to finish off tomorrow. I need to get some more sort of basey sort of bits of MDF and stuff to do more irregular shaped terrain pieces, because mine are all very circular. What with them being CDs.
It's amazingly easy as well when you get the hang of it, isn't it? I mean, you're dealing with it in a super micro scale. It's amazing how much you can turn out pretty quickly. You know, you can do a town in, well, not even a day. I mean, really in a couple of hours. Whole villages are capable, and then forests. And it's easy to get into that world view that you're sort of creating a whole world and you're just knocking it out. And from a distance of looking down at the table, you don't need to reflect the tree branches, for instance. You've just got a forest, and it's sort of like an aerial photograph, and it's kind of addictive, and it's pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
I've certainly found that.
Yeah, because I mean, what I've been using is actually this is my best bit of the bench recommendation.
Oh no! Don't say that.
Yeah, it's the best.
Get it in the neck from Rich and Nick now.
Hey, Clarky, nicking our part of our show, right? Yeah, Villaggio do an earth texture, it's an acrylic mix, so it's like a thick putty. It's a really nice shade, and you literally just paint it on. So I got I'm literally getting these CDs. I give them a little scrub over with wet and dry paper to roughen them up a bit. Cover the hole with a little bit of plastic card or something, and then just get this Villaggio texture, slap it all over. It gives you a really nice texture, and you can make sort of rough ground. Leave it to dry. Give it a very dry brush of like a sort of bony colour, and then I just get these pine trees that I make and some old clump foliage I just rip to pieces, and just big chunk of glue on the bottom, chuck on the foliage, and then put some other little textures around the areas, and you've got a nice sort of foresty, rough countryside sort of base. And just throw that on the table, and you're done. I've been playing around with. I bought a flocking machine. I got one for Christmas last year. The flocking machine, and just using that with 2mm flock to make fields. It stands up.
Regimented grass that all stands up.
Yeah.
So fields that are as tall as your fingers.
Yeah, wheat and corn and stuff. But it just works. You just literally just do, put a little sliver of PVA, put some tiny little flock on it to show that it's a sort of hedge, and then just do squares of different coloured flocks, and it just looks like fields of different crops going everywhere. And it's great fun. So, yeah. I've been doing lots of that. Other than that, started on some overworld figures, and I've been putting together some Bag the Hun bases ready for Market Larden. But that's it. So we can leave the workbench now.
Excellent stuff. And so in that case, then we will wander away and
games. I've been playing stuff.
Oh, you've been playing stuff as well.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, yes. Sorry, I've forgotten about that. Yeah. Go on.
Meeting up in Abergavenny with the usual crew of Matt and Ralph and Mark. and we've been playing Rangers of Shadow Deep.
Oh, you beat me to it.
Yeah.
Oh.
So we've had 3 games. So the first game was the first one from the sort of opening chapter of the campaign, which was quite difficult. And then Ralph joined us, so we played the spider one, which was a bit of a letdown. We finished in a half hour and we won. It was quite easy, so we were sort of sitting there thinking, what can we do now? So Matt just came up with this little scenario, and we played that, and there were zombies and rats and spiders, and we got our asses kicked. But it was just a play, just to want to show Ralph some of the rules a bit more.
Yeah.
But, I had great fun. Really, really liking that game.
Oh, cool, because I say you were...
I was unsure.
You weren't, you were a bit unsure about it, but yeah, and so some very nice pictures on Twitter. I mean, I must admit, I kind of went, oh, that looks pretty, and then Mike goes, oh yeah, the map we were using, it's the Winter Scrubland map from Seagull Box Battles, and I thought, excellent, I've got one of those. That looks cool.
Yeah, looks really well. What we have discovered is we're really bad at cooperative games, all of us. Because the first scenario... No. What I suspect is that 3 people are really good at cooperative games, and then there's you. Oh no, it's all of us. So put it this way: the very first scenario, you start off with your rangers and their minions in the centre of a village, and there's 6 treasure tokens all around, and then there's a bunch of zombies coming in from different areas and rats and stuff. So, cooperative game. Do we all work together and clean up the treasure tokens methodically, keeping in a tight formation and taking down any zombies that come near us, or B, all of us rush in completely different directions, trying to find the nearest treasure token so we can keep it?
And then suddenly go, hang on a minute, I appear to be a little bit cut off.
Yeah, we all got completely cut off, and then worked out, hang on, we should be playing this together because all of the experience we capture, we get, is for all of us. But no, it's like, go for the treasure first. And I managed to find a survivor. And Matt did say to me, if we keep the survivor alive to the end of the game, we get some experience points. First time I get attacked, I chuck in the survivor as fodder to keep the zombie busy. Completely forgetting the fact that we got experience points if we get him alive. None of that. In you go, mate. So yeah, we need to work on our cooperative bits a bit more.
And work a little bit more on. Hang on a second. What's the aim of the scenario again?
Yeah.
It's to rescue the villagers, not have them eaten by zombies.
Yeah.
Yes. Never mind.
So we all live and learn. So that's it.
Excellent stuff. Right, okay. In that case then, what we'll do, we'll take another break, and when we come back, we will be approaching our main subject for this show.
Will that be in the library, Neil?
No, we don't have a library, mate. I'm afraid we'll be slumming it around the table.
Okay. I mean, pretend to be in a library.
And once again, we interrupt the show for a report from our South Wales reporter on the latest happening at Firestorm Games. Come in, Michael.
Neil, you join me here as I look upon a vista of calm. It's hard to believe that only a few weeks ago, the Anti-Luff was finally brought to justice after a week-long orgy of purchasing. I understand that the brave souls of Firestorm Games finally overpowered him after distracting him with a turkey sandwich, and have now locked him away in the bowels of the building where he can do no harm.
Oh my word. So was there much damage to the shop?
There was some, but the building is still standing, and over the last week, teams of volunteers have been rebuilding the shop and installing the latest anti-luff defences. This can never happen again.
That is indeed great news. So, Mike, do you have anything else to report?
Funny you should ask that, Neil. To celebrate the overthrow of the anti-luff, the management of Firestorm have decided to hold a January sale, with some items reduced by 80%.
I'm sorry, did you say 80%?
That's right, Neil. There are savings across 140 different lines, so nearly everyone can find a bargain. And what's more, we have a new offer code that's going to run until the end of February. That adds another 5% off all purchases.
Oh, so what's the new offer code, Mike?
Hang on, Neil. Have to interrupt you there. I've just heard a loud crash from downstairs. Neil, something's happening. The whole building is shaking. Oh, God, something is emerging from the cellar. It's short and it smells of turkey.
Don't worry about that. What's the new offer code, Mike?
Oh, no, it's the anti-luff. Some idiot has told him the offer code, Neil, and he's broken loose again. Neil, this might be my last report. I just can't see me getting out of here in one piece. Neil,
Mike! What's the offer code? What's the offer code? Apologies, listener. We appear to have lost the line to our South Wales reporter. What's this? It's a text from Mike. He's got the offer code. What a hero. He's come through for us all. If you visit Firestorm Games, either online at firestormgames.co.uk or in their shop, you can use the code NEWMEEPLE, that's NEWMEEPLE, all lowercase, in order to gain an extra 5% discount on all goods. Remember, Firestorm Games gives free worldwide shipping at over £40. Some exclusions may apply. See website for details. So happy shopping at Firestorm Games. But watch out for the anti-luff. And so we reached that time when we broach our main subject for this show. Mike mentioned that we hadn't done a kind of Meeples project for a segment for a while, so this is it's almost like at least for Michael, it's a mega project with one of the inspirations for the whole thing. Whereas for me, okay, when I was visiting the Peakatorium a few weeks ago, I was given a gift. It was a late Christmas gift, and Colin turned around and presented me with these 3 sheets of plastic, and it was like,
wow,
what's this?
Thanks, Phil.
That'll do you. I said, well, what's that then? He said, it's a 2 million English Civil War army, 3D printed. Gentlemen, I've heard of microscale and even played some microscale, but this is taking it one step further. So let us delve. Do you remember on the banana splits when
Taking us This is taking us back.
This is showing a certain age. But do you remember on the banana splits when they used to have that cartoon where that family used to be in the car and get shrunk into the back garden and go and investigate the back garden with acceptable ants were now giants and all that sort of thing. Do you remember that Do you remember that at all?
Yeah,
that's kind of how I feel like where we are at the moment, because we are. I mean, it's something like Fantastic Voyage, where we're being shrunk down to micro scale.
Is that on this podcast, Neil? That's what's happened to us. All shrunk.
Yeah.
And well, Or is it more of a case of we just shrunk down to the size of Mr. Hobbs? So these two mil figures appear like giants, and please, explain to somebody who is somewhat mystified the whole aspect of gaming with 2mm figures.
Well, that's a very good question, isn't it, really? Which I suppose is why I'm on the show. Hopefully I'll be able to talk about that.
Yeah.
So
it wasn't a very good question. It's a great topic, but it was a terrible question that you put to us.
What you're trying to say is why? Why am I bothering with this?
Yeah.
So, like a lot of things, it came about as a bit of a happenstance. I think you probably say that. So for a long time, I thought the 30 Years' War would be a great period to wargame. And the reason for that is that it's the loads and loads of battles. So you'd expect that over 30 years, I suppose. But in particular, in that period, there are fewer sieges and lots of battles in the field. And that's because Germany just wasn't as concentrated as regards fortified cities as the Low Countries were. It was more spread out. There was more open ground. There just weren't as many facilities for siege warfare. So you have a lot of battles between the opposing armies, and a lot of them are very interesting. So for a long time, I thought, well, I really want to do something in the 30 Years' War, and I wasn't sure what. And my first inclination was to really try and game it in 10mm or in 6mm. And the thing that put me off was the thought of having to cut off all of the pikes from the figures which are holding pikes and replace them with wire, because I never particularly liked that sort of spaghetti pike, that bendy pike syndrome, which you can sometimes get. And I was casting around for ideas, and I thought, well, 2mm figure blocks, that may be a solution, because you don't actually have the pikes at all. They're not. It's just a block of pikes. You don't see the individual pikes. It's the representation of a block. And it was either going to be that or 28mm, and I was already doing 28mm for the later 17th century. I didn't really want to do it for the 30 Years' War. So that was the thing which started me thinking, okay, 2mm. And at that time, I cast around online, and there really wasn't anyone who'd done 2mm wargaming in the sort that I wanted to do it. There was a lot of people using it for the 19th century. There weren't many people using it for the 17th century. I think I found one website which was actually very, very helpful. But that was the only one. So I thought, okay, well, we're going to drop down to the figure scale. And I remember, Mike, you said something on Twitter, or it might have been in an email. He said, once you've dropped down the scales, it's actually really hard to go up again. Explain what I mean by that, or what, Mike, you can explain what you mean by that in a moment.
No, Sid, you explain, because I can't remember saying it.
You did say it. It was a very, very wise thing to say.
Indeed, yeah.
So wise, you can't remember why you said it there.
Yeah.
What I started thinking about was, rather than just using a scale for a particular game because it was suitable, because I didn't need to mess around with individual pikes in the hands of the figures, I thought, well, how can we use that scale to do more things in the rules and in the game that I liked, and to do less things that I disliked? So one of the things I really like about the 17th century, and I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, is that it's a time of a change in military tactics on the battlefield. And it's a kind of an iconic change which you have. So rather than huge Spanish formations of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 men in so-called tercios, you are moving from that to a more battalion-based, brigade-based system, which is used by the Swedish and the German forces in the 30 Years' War. You've got a contrast visually between large, deeper formations, tercios, and Swedish brigades, which are smaller, integrated formations, and German systems, which were sometimes a mix of the both. And you've also potentially got Dutch formations, which were quite intricate, really small groups of point with musketeers on the field. You've also got a contrast in how the cavalry was organised. Some larger formations, like the Imperialist cuirassiers, almost three-quarter plate armour, and looser formations, such as the Reiters, which were used by both sides in the 30 Years' War. So you've got a lot of formational differences but within quite large groups. And when you look at the paintings of the period and the printing of the period, you get a real sense of how the contemporaries wanted to represent the battles that they fought. So before I'd even bought the figures, I started looking at the artworks from the 17th century, and in particular the works of two Flemish painters. One was called Sebastian Vranckx, and the other one's called Peter Sneyers. And the paintings are available on, you can see them online. And Sneyers in particular was a master in battlefield painting. There became almost an industry in battle painting in the 17th century. Not just the depiction of large-scale battles on canvas, but also smaller-scale canvases. And in particular, towards the end of the century, it becomes very much smaller-scale depictions of battles which have been fought between cavalrymen mainly and also foot. But in the earlier part of the century, Sneyers is really producing very, very large canvases which memorialise and depict the battles which have been fought in the 30 Years' War. And, of course, not great on a podcast to be talking about artworks, but if people want to Google that, Peter Sneyers, Snayers, and you will see in his paintings the differences between the different formations and the way that the formations are deployed. So either a checkerbox formation or 2 or 3 lines. And I thought this looked fantastic. This was the idea of you're fighting a battle and you can fight an iconic battle and you can have the formations there which are to some extent a differentiation between the two sides in the war. And I thought, well, use 2mm for the things I enjoy. I enjoy sort of thinking about why one side is successful in battle and another side is defeated. And at least one of the elements of victory in the 17th century probably have been the way in which the armies were organised and deployed. Now, that's not, and there are different views on that. It's not necessarily just a difference between Swedish formations and Spanish formations and imperial formations. It's also a difference between how many lines the armies were drawn up in, whether they were drawn up in 2 lines or in 1 line or maybe in 3 lines. So the imperialists suffer significant defeat at Breitenfeld when Tilly's army is drawn up in 1 line. In other battles where there's 2 lines, you see the generals really spending time trying to marshal their forces so they keep those 2 lines on their own side integral so they can support and replace units. And that's a big feature of the imperialists in Lutzen in 1632. And then you also see battles in which a reserve is a key aspect, such as the French at Rocroi in 1643. So you've got the different sort of formations which have been used by armies on the battlefield. And that's not something you can easily do in 28mm, because you've only got a certain amount of table, you've only got a certain amount of figures, and it takes time to produce an army. So one of the things I was thinking about was with a 2mm scale, you can really elevate yourself from the level of a captain, colonel, or even a brigade commander. You are now in charge of an army. You're a king, you're a marshal, you're a captain general, and you're able to replicate one of the iconic battles of that period in an area which is perhaps as small as sort of 3 or 4 feet square. So by dropping down the scales, you've assumed a different sort of level of command in respect to the battle. And you're fighting a battle which visually would be something which contemporaries might recognise, and you can verify that by looking at the paintings which we've talked about by Sneyers and Vranckx. Those are the battles which would be recognisable to them. And also I felt that I was trying to lose some of the things which I didn't like about the Renaissance period, which is the fiddling and the fussing about with your pikes and muskets in a formation. I'm sure lots of listeners would have probably had an English Civil War game or 30 Years' War game at some point in their lives. And those rules often focus on what are you doing with your pikes? Are your pikes separate from your musketeers? Have you got sleeves of musketeers on either side? Are your pikes behind or detached? And I wanted to definitely get away from that. I wanted the basis of figures to be the brigades or the significant battalions or even the tertios on the tabletop. And again, you can do that in 2mm. Because with 2mm figure blocks, you've not really got figures at all. You're painting a block of figures to represent a formation in a particular area on the table. So the ideas of subunits and moving pipes separately from muskets, that's gone. Your level is elevated to the point command of an army, you're no longer bothered about the micro scale of messing around with even salvo fire. See, you've traded the small unit tactics for army tactics. You've traded worrying about subunits to really worrying about lines and a reserve. And those were the sort of key things that I wanted to get to. I wanted people to be looking at a battle, which was a painting, and looking at a table and seeing a comparison. And also, just as Snayers was painting for generals, in particular one of the imperialist generals who was commissioned to paint 12 paintings by, just as that general would have been looking at the painting with that general's perception and concerns, you'd be looking at the table as a player and emulating exactly the same sort of reaction to the battlefield as the person who would be looking at the painting in the 17th century. And that was really why I thought 2 mil was a really great way of trying to get into the period in a way which I think people, opening the possibilities was one of the things that I was thinking about at the time.
I think you basically nailed it. It by moving into a smaller scale. I mean, for me, when I started to think about doing Napoleonics in 2 mil, it was because of the pictures I saw of your units from the Lutzen game.
Yeah.
Because you had, it's something that I love doing, which is having small figures on big bases. I don't like having, bases that are just big enough for the figures to fit on. I want to make almost like a mini diorama. I want it to look like what it's meant to represent, which is probably why I don't like doing sort of big battles really in 28 mil, because Neil, as you say, it's always 12 men walking around with, carrying a flag. Yeah, even when you have like the big units of 36.
Yeah.
Okay, that looks a bit more impressive, but it takes up so much space on the table. You can't, you have the juxtaposition of a large amount of table space being taken over for what is relatively a small amount of figures. Also, it's like a battalion, but this battalion is going to take 1.5 feet of table space.
Yeah.
So you need massive tables to be able to do it, and it seems much easier to me to reduce down the size of the table and reduce down the size of the units. So that was the big driver. Is how can I represent on a single base a battalion of infantry? And 2 mil is the way. I did think about using 6 mil, but even with 6 mil, you look at sort of 24 6 mil figures, in a row, it still looks like 24 individual figures. Whereas with a 2 mil, it's a block.
It's a block. It's a group, and it's recognisable as being a formation that a contemporary would have thought about.
Exactly.
One of the things I wanted to try and get back to was writing the set of rules that we've ended up using by reference to what contemporaries thought was important in the battle. And when you look at some of the tactical manuals at the time, they were really talking about, brigade formations and battalions in lines. So 2 of the books that used most were Pallas Armata, which is from 1672 by Sir James Turner, and another book was written by one of the imperial generals, and it was one of the books I talked about on the Oddcast. When they talk about so the 17th century is a great age for writing about stuff, writing about the battles you've just fought in, writing about military manuals, and there's a number of those around. A lot of them are sort of kind of plagiarized from each other, but what Montecuccoli does, which is the imperial general, and Turner does, they talk about the formations you should be trying to adopt, and that's really writing about vans and reserves and rear guards. They're not really writing about single battalion units because they're looking at deploying armies. And what I wanted to try and do is to have a game which picked up on what contemporaries thought was important. So the lines of troops are really important. The reserve is absolutely critical. That's the key determining factor of success or failure. How you've used your reserve. Do you use it to break the enemy, or do you use it to cover your retreat? how you scout, how you deploy onto the table. And those are all features that are a sort of a grand tactical theme. And I felt that focusing on 28mm, although obviously I'm a 28mm gamer, as anyone see my blog would realise, because I like painting, that wasn't the message that I wanted to get away with these rules. I mean, you can create a wonderful game about the 30 Years' War in 28mm, or indeed in any scale, or indeed not in figures at all. But the game I wanted to create was quite specifically in a 2mm scale, because that was the game that I wanted to try and develop these sort of ideas which were in synchronicity, or synchronized really with what the contemporaries had recorded visually and also wrote about. The other thing I think as well is practically, getting a lot of figures on a table in an evening at a club is quite difficult. One of the great things about 2mm is it's superbly portable. You can put everything into the boot of a small car and have it down a curb and you can bring it out. And one of the things I thought about was how successful some of Rich and Nick's games have been, to Lardy's, relating to numbers of figures. So I remember counting up the figures that they'd used in a game of Sharp Practice, and it came to be about 100 figures, so 50 a side, and that was easily manageable in the context of an evening's game. Yeah. So I tried, when I made the Lutzen game, to end up with no more than 50 figure bases. So going through the various different orders of battle, I sort of kind of got it there with a bit of fudging around the edges. And I wanted to have a game which was a replication of an iconic battle, but also was manageable in the evening. And, that's been a learning curve. That's not always been difficult. But I think 2mm is certainly one way you can do that. I don't think you could really fight the Battle of Lutzen or the Battle of Nordlinger or White Mountain in 28mm in a 3-hour period. But with the rules tailored for that time scale and with a 2mm figure scale, I think you can actually achieve it in an area of table which is manageable for you to bring on figures and take off figures, setting up the game, closing the game, and also playing the game itself. So all of those things which were, if you like, the design features of what we wanted to try and achieve, all of those things were sort of coming together with 2mm, probably the most unlikely scale for wargaming. All of those things were coming together with 2mm, just because of the dynamics of that particular project.
Yeah. Again, nail has been hit firmly on the head. The rules you are going to use for playing this type of game have to take into account the bigger picture, because if you just want to stand up and fight the game, well, you don't need to do that in 2mm. The beauty of 2mm with the size of the bases and the fact that you're playing with, in Napoleonic terms, a core. Reserves are very important, like you said, Sid. Flank maneuver. You've got the space on the table to do these big flanking maneuvers and watch your troops disappear over a hill and never come back again because they found a pub. And the rules have to take that into account. Of it's not just portraying the battle. It's almost portraying the lead up to the battle. Mm-hmm. And I know that Matt's been talking about Bloody Battles, the rule set, and when they played that, you literally have no idea when you start the game where the battle's going to take place. You know that there's various camps out there. You know the enemy have been sighted, but the enemy who are camping can literally dictate where the battle is going to take place, and then it's up to you as the attacker to basically form up or to try and persuade the defender to fight the battle in a place that you prefer.
That's a great point. And that's certainly something you can do in 2mm. So you mentioned earlier on the podcast about building 2mm scenery. It really is straightforward. So for the Lutzen game back in 2016, I'm not a quick terrain maker by any means, but I made the terrain in basically a week because one of the things which is difficult about 2mm, but is also when you're building terrain is a godsend, is that you're not going to be dealing with height contours significantly. Your height contours, and I used 2 foot square extruded polystyrene boards, so blue styrofoam boards. They needed height contours only of about 10 mil in a couple of places to try and replicate the battle. So your hills are really simple. You've not got much height. What you are trying to develop is you're trying to put onto the board is contours like rivers or streams, and then you've got forests or woods that you mentioned before, Mike. And actually building that terrain is really straightforward because you can gouge out the rivers pretty simply just using a scalpel or a router. You can create the woods really simply by foam being painted appropriately. You can add extra contours if you want some hills which can be moved around, or you can sort of settle the contours onto the boards just by 10 mil leveled foam. And you've really, you're creating with some scatter and some glue and some paint, you've got your board there. It doesn't need to be detailed sort of scenery, although you can build on villages and towns and make that look really quite attractive. But your boards are quite easy to make, and that then enables you to be quite ambitious in saying, okay, well, I don't just want to do the area of the battle. I want to do an area around that. So you then can get to the fact that, okay, different forces are arriving on your edge of the table. We don't know where the battle's going to be. And you've got the possibility that the battle could be taking place in 4 or 5 different locations. So you've elevated from just a simple battle in a particular fixed place to the possibility of the battle taking place on those terrain boards or that table which you've created. And you've already got an interface there between the strategic and the tactical, or probably more the operational and the tactical. You don't precisely know where the battle's going to be. So those factors that commanders, certainly in the 17th century, but I guess in all periods, certainly up to the late 19th century, those factors of finding the enemy, locating the enemy, knowing where the enemy is, moving towards the enemy, and concentrating your own forces. Those are things that you gain from 2 mil, just as you are also losing things in 2 mil, because you're losing pretty figures, you're losing flags to an extent, and you're also losing that sort of small unit tactical grit, which is in itself really fascinating. But it's a trade-off. 2 mil's not better. 2 mil's just different. It just facilitates you to go to a different place in the hobby on a tabletop war game.
Yeah, and that is the key, is when you play in a 2 mil core level, or the equivalent in whatever historical period you're in game, you're not a battalion commander. Your role is not to worry about whether your troops are in square or in column. You're the corps commander. Your priorities are those units of troops in the right place, because you don't care what formation they're in. That's up to the battalion commander. It's up to the divisional commander to make sure that his troops have been aligned properly. Your role is to make sure that you've got the troops in the right place at the right time to carry out their job. And it's a completely different mindset. And like you say, it makes you think about the battle as a whole, instead of a tiny part of the battle, which we're all sort of used to playing. If we play 15 mil, if you do 15 mil Napoleonic, you might have a division. If you're playing 28 mil sharp practice, you've literally got a company with some, with a little bit of support. This is a game at a much different. You've got a different role.
I think that's entirely true. I think that's hitting the nail absolutely on the head, and that's something. Yeah, that's what you guys do.
That's what we do.
and that was something which was really born out from the period I was choosing as well. So, I mean, you guys, Rich and Nick, a lot of 20th century gamers, they love taking a smaller scale action and finding out a huge amount of detail relating to it. So the Battlefront books, Pen and Sword, do those. They are absolutely amazing. And when I was doing a lot of games on the Great War, you'd pick up something on the action on Thiepval or Passchendaele, and you'd be able to look at the precise order of battle of a battalion on a day and which machine guns it faced, and where were the individual opponents, anti-tank guns or whatever they had deployed in the line, and you get down to a great amount of tactical granularity. roll back to the 17th century, you haven't got any of that. You really don't have any of that precise, accessible information. I mean, there is information, but it is not particularly accessible to a wargame. And therefore, you look at somewhere else. You've got to go from the small unit tactical scale, because you can't tell what, precisely the Swedish Green Regiment was doing at a particular moment in the battle. You've got an idea, but it's not as granular as somebody's memoirs from 1944, whatever it is. But what you do have is lots of accounts of how the battle unfolded and how the commanders dealt with that. So again, you're trading off small unit for large army scale historical information. And that was definitely something that I wanted to get to. I wanted to fight the battles. I wanted to fight the iconic battles of the period. I wasn't so much focused on trying to replicate small unit tactics. There's a fantastic game in 30 Years' War to do that with, like the English Civil War. But the scale I wanted to try and replicate was larger than that. You were deciding the fates of whole nation states as opposed to just regiments.
Mm.
Okay, given that's what you want to do, and something you mentioned earlier, that from a game rules point of view is a very different experience to what a lot of rule sets offer you. So, given what you want, are there any, for want of a better phrase, off-the-shelf rules that work well to obtain that experience? Or have you found that actually what I've had to do is look at putting my own set of rules together?
That's a really good question. And there are some rules which are really focused on 6mm and the level of command of 6mm. So there's an American Civil War set, I think, called Outtro Freedom, which is a really excellent set. And that comes really helpfully with a large set of scenarios for the Eastern campaign and for the Western campaign. And that was a big influence on me when I was casting around for rules. And they took as one of their sort of lodestones the Paddy Griffiths Battle Tactics of the American Civil War, which is a great read, a sort of an icon, not an icon, a sort of iconoclastic book really about what was happening in the American Civil War. And Outtro Freedom is a really good set of rules. And I looked at that a lot in thinking about the scale and how they'd abbreviated a lot of the detail down. But what that rule set, for all its qualities, didn't do was give me any feeling that I could transport that to the 17th century and get the same sort of results. I then cast around in the sort of the 17th century sets of rules I had, and I've got a lot of rules over the years, and they're almost all excellent in their own regard, but they weren't really trying to grasp the sort of the strategic and tactical dimensions I was trying to get at. They tended to be rules which were still not really focused on an army scale, or they would have something which was an aside to an army morale system, that once the units were shattered or broken, that would somehow affect the ability of the army to continue fighting. They didn't seem to be putting forward at the first point the tactical manuals of the period and what the contemporaries thought were the metrics of victory and defeat. And that was really what I wanted to try and get to. So with a friend of mine in Canada called Kirk Campbell, we started putting together a set of rules in 2016, and we've been working on that since, which is really trying to create a set of rules for the period, which is really quite specific to the period, which acknowledges that it's really an army level game. And the consequences of playing an army level game is that a lot is abstracted as regards the actual fighting. But what you do have is perhaps a disproportionate influence of the planning stage of the battle. So we have in the set of rules, we've got a council of war in which the different deployments of the forces are quite important. And then we have a morale system which revolves around the utilization of the reserve on the basis that as the contemporaries wrote about. Once the reserve was deployed, that was really it. And it's that point in the battle which is the key point, because the reserves just weren't deployed unless it was such a point in time that the battle could be won, or the Golden Bridge, as they used to call it in the 17th century, had to be created to allow your army to exit from the field. And the great disasters of Breitenfeld were really because in that particular battle, Tilly had no reserve left. So key points which come out in respect of the contemporary accounts and also the manuals from the period, those are the things that we made centre stage brought centre stage in our rules. And for that reason, we sort of ended up writing our own rules, although with an extremely appreciative nod to other rule sets and people who've done similar things before. And like all rules, it's a process of continuing to fight games with different people as well, and looking at different battles. So one of the things that I want to try and do is over the next few years is the anniversary of the 30 Years' War means that we've got a number of battles which we can fight in 2020, 2022, 2024, and hopefully we'll be able to sort of run through a lot of those battles on the anniversary in 2 mil over a sort of a fairly leisurely sort of period of hopefully another 30 years. If you remember Zimmer frame modelling about in the 70s, but certainly trying to sort of push the rules into a place that the history's really taking the centre stage, and it's trying to recreate in those rules the particular imagery that we've got with 2 mil. I think that's part of the interest in the project. I don't think I'd have been interested in carrying on quite as much if all I was really trying to do was just a set of rules for the 30 Years' War to enable me to fight one pipe block against another pipe block. I mean, I think that's a great game, but that wasn't the game I wanted to try and create.
I guess for me it's been a bit easier because I've been looking at Napoleonics, and so I've been looking at Etzam Result, or Etzam Resultat, which is a set of rules specifically written for large corps and army scale, battles, where the movement element, shall we say, or the unit is a division. And that's made up of a number of bases, each representing a battalion with the artillery and so forth. So those are really good because they're off the shelf and they've got a great sort of campaign guides as well, which introduce sort of breakdowns of the real battles. But the battles in the scenarios are very nicely done because you get a briefing for each side, which just tells you what you know. So you'll have a rough idea where the enemy is, but you don't really know. Yeah. And likewise on the other side, they get their own briefing, so they know what troops they've got, but they don't know what they're facing. So again, you've got it. I think with any of these games, having an umpire is probably a good idea because obviously you can play them straight opposite 2-player games, 4-player games where you each got a corps, so off. I think with any sort of games of this scale, having somebody there just to add that element of surprise, shall we say, that sort of Kriegspiel style. This is what you can see now.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's a really good point because those games where you're bringing in lots of different operational dimensions as well as a sort of grand tactical field that don't tend to be particularly binary. You need that, or those games benefit from having somebody who's an umpire who can keep that atmosphere of uncertainty going. And I think that's certainly something which, you look at Napoleonic campaigns, 7 Years' War campaigns, Franco-Prussian War, that element of uncertainty is there in all of those manoeuvring of large bodies of troops. And certainly it's present in the 30 Years' War.
Yeah. But again, it's looking at the battle as a whole. That's the important thing. It's not, what the individual battalions are doing. It is a much higher scale. And there are rules that do that and rules that do it very well. Like I say, Bloody Big Battles is one that Matt really enjoys, which is later 19th century. I'm really interested for Etzam Resultat. I've got a game planned for that next month, so I can't wait to see it. Obviously, Sid, you're looking at a period of history that's not really covered that allows so you're probably forced to write your own set of rules. But there's lots of rules out there for people who are interested in playing these games.
I think that's right. I mean, so Chris Pringle with Bloody Big Battles, I mean, I think following from Warring Empires, which was a really excellent set that Chris had out in the 90s. I mean, Chris has been working on those sorts of battle scale, war games for a long, long time. I mean, that's a really, really great rule set. He's a great guy who was sort of friend of a friend of mine. And there are rule sets out there, so people who are interested in 2 mil should not be put off with the fact that just I've gone down the route of looking at a set of rules, which is really mainly created by me and Kurt. There are a lot of rules out there which will cater for 2 mil, and I think that it's a scale which almost encourages you to be a little bit inventive. You're probably going to spend less time creating the armies, and less time creating the terrain, and probably less money as well. And that possibly allows you either to treat the whole 2 mil project as being a quicker project, or it would free up time for any wargamer to spend time relating to thinking about the history and the rules and how that best reflects what you're trying to do. So a good chum of mine, Mark Backhouse, hello Mark, and me did, Mark did his game of the Siege of Portsmouth at the Other Partisan last year. And Mark's game was absolutely beautiful and it was a fantastic looking game. But Mark didn't deploy many figures on the table. He deployed some ships and some figures and it looked magnificent. He spent a lot of time in the terrain. But what we did think about, probably more than we might have done if we'd just deployed a couple of ECW armies against each other, was what the rules are trying to do and trying to abbreviate rules down to reflect a historical campaign which was taking place over the area around Portsmouth in multiple locations to reflect the entirety of the siege, and how we would integrate chance cards and other cards into that battle experience. So Mark didn't spend all this time doing figures or terrain. We spent a lot of time thinking about, how the game would actually flow. And that's something which is a lot of fun when you pick up a period that you can do the terrain in a week, and you could probably do the armies, even for a significant battle, over probably a month. Certainly did that for Lutz, and I think did all the figure blocks in a couple of months. And that does give you a lot more time to think about, what I'm actually doing in the game, what do I want to try and achieve? And that was a really refreshing process, because a lot of the time we're buying rules and it's going to tell us what to do, and then the big job is painting the horses, and painting your Normans, and painting the figures and getting the units together. I think in 2 mil, that's a really quick process. You can get up and running in 2 mil really quickly. And if you want to do it as a quick project, it's fine. But if you want to trade off the time spent painting figures and flags and horses and whatnot and terrain for thinking about how you wargame that particular period and the battles, then 2 mil is a good place to do that, because you can trade off time at the painting table to time spent actually playing the game and experimenting with the type of wargame that you want to achieve.
So you mentioned about painting.
Yes.
And I know Mr. Hobbs has talked a little bit about painting. And I've looked at these things. Now, to me, it's hard enough getting your head round painting 6 mil figures, having painted, 28s and 15s. Painting 2 mil seems to be another kind of, it's yet another kind of mindset change. So, can you take us through your thoughts on how on earth you get this, to all intents and purposes, sometimes blob of metal to look like a unit? How do you paint it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I thought that was exactly what I was when I started the project. So all my figures in 2 mil are from Irregular Miniatures, which is in North Yorkshire. And I think that they really are the only 2mm figure manufacturer. There are some 3mm figure manufacturers, and an increasing number of 3mm figures have been produced, I think, by laser printing, and they are lovely. They are really lovely, but they are figures. They're not figure blocks. Now, the thing about irregular is that almost all the infantry is figure blocks. The cavalry is a bit of a hybrid. I mean, that's more, they are figures, but, they are not cast and sculpted with the majesty of a 6mm figure from Pete Berry, for instance. They are kind of rough and ready. And that's not in any way disparaging, because as you say, Neil, you've got to retrain your eye to look at the figures in a slightly different way. So when you look at the paintings, going back to Peter Snayers and Sebastian Franks, there's a real convention about 17th century battle paintings that you have some figures in the foreground, often sort of soldiers who are wounded or milling about, and a commander. And the commander is normally one of the people who's commissioned the painting, certainly in Franks' paintings for Piccolomini, the Austrian commander, the imperial commander. And then in the midground, you've got increasingly impressionistic paintings of the troops, formations, and in the background, which is definitely the scale that you'd look at as a 2mm, you have really impressionistic figure blocks being painted. And when you look at the paintings close up in the flesh in an art gallery, you will see that there is no depiction of people's hands or faces. It's just blobs of colour. And that was the approach that I took, really relating to the 2mm figure blocks, because you can't paint 2mm figures. Well, there's hardly a figure there. It's just a block. What you're trying to do is an impression of a block of troops. So two things helped in that regard. First of all, having a really light coloured base. So I went with snow. Lutzen was not fought in the snow, but it was an extremely frosty day. And, I sort of cheated a bit and I made it into snow. So got the figure blocks on a very light grey and snowy base. So they stand out because I painted the figure blocks matte black and then impressionistically added colour. And you can add hats or stripes of colour for the broad depiction of the figures in the block. But the thing is to try and make that eye-catching, and having a really light base, I think, really helps. I tried some with green, just sort of green painting, and the figure blocks were just lost on green. So I went with white, but you could easily do it with a very, very sandy, light brown or light beige, I think. And no doubt there's lots of other combinations that you can use. So I think that helps. I think the other thing is the contrast between a black undercoat and a very, not even bothering with highlight, you're just going straight to the highlight to try and pick out things on those figure blocks which make it the figure block eye-catching. And it won't just be one figure block on a base, it might be 3 or 4 or 2. And the idea is to catch the eye. It's not to in any way paint figures. I put a guide on my blog. My blog is, what's my blog called? It's Roundwood's World, and you can find that at www.sydneyroundwood.blogspot.com. So all one word, sydneyroundwood.blogspot.com. But if you search on it on Google, you'll get there. And on the blog, there is a painting guide for 2mm 30 years war figure blocks. It doesn't really matter, it's 30 years war. That isn't by any means what you should necessarily do, it's just how I did it. And you're trying to catch the eye. You're trying to sort of pick out the figure block on the base. Now, that doesn't really require any sort of painting skill. It just requires you to sort of pick up a paintbrush and try and blob on the particular colour on the figure block. And me and Mark Backhouse started experimenting kind of independently, but then we sort of got our heads together in really making the figure blocks. So Mark's done a lot more than this than I have. And rolling out green stuff on an MDF base and really carving the green stuff a little bit so that you're on the edge of the rolled green stuff of 2mm thickness. You've got a representation of where the figures might be. And then you just painting the blobs on the green stuff. And I know that sounds crazy, but it really does look good. And Mark's done a lot with Roman legions, and I've done some with Dutch militia, and also some sort of units which are partially routing. And you can add those sort of green stuff bases alongside the irregular bases for some variety. And again, it's just the ability to paint an area of block in black and then highlight a reference to another colour. And you're so far away from the figures when you're looking down as a wargamer at the table that, like you'd look in the background of a Snayer's picture and just see blocks of troops filling in the background representing the battle. You as a wargamer are seeing exactly the same thing. You're elevated in every way, visually and in the rules, from identifying individuals. And again, I quite like that compatibility of what you were seeing on the table with what the rules are trying to represent.
Yeah, that is it. As you say, you're painting the unit, so forget about painting figures. I do add some highlights on mine because I'm not as brave as you said. But again, start with black. And a great idea is to, and this is something I got from Matt Slade, is to look at pictures of reenactors at reenactment events.
Yeah.
Because what you'll find is, for example, French infantry, Napoleonic French infantry. You always think they were mostly in blue. But when you get a group of like 100 reenactors together in a block, you look at a photograph of them from the front, all you can see is white.
Mm.
White trousers, and they had the white waistcoats. The only bit of blue you can really, and obviously the cross belts, the only bit of blue you can see is a tiny bit on their arms. So what you can literally do with your French is paint the bottom of the figure white, put dots of white into the centre where the figures probably are going to be, paint some little stripes of blue, and on the sides of the blocks, paint the blue there because they were side on, so you'd see their arms. On the back, they probably got backpacks on, so again, a little bit of blue and then a dot of brown for the backpacks. A handful, it takes seconds. I mean, I do blocks on coffee stirrers, and what I tend to do is all the figures I want for one particular base, I'll put on a single coffee stirrer. So say I'm doing, 4 little blocks of troops on one base. I put them all together, paint them all. That's it. That's one base done. And it takes seconds, literally seconds to paint. Because when I started off, I was using my optic visor. I was making sure I put the faces in the right place.
Yeah.
But forget all that. It is literally a couple of dots, and then the top part of the figure, it's black shakos. Forget about plumes or anything. Black shakos, so paint the top bit of the figure black, paint the back of the figure, back of the head all black, and your figure's done. Horses are really simple because you paint the back part of the horse brown, you paint the front part of the horse brown, and then the bit in the middle is the figure. You paint whatever colour the uniform jacket is.
Yeah, and for somebody who, for a wargamer who's painting 28mm figures, and we've all been there. How many more have we got to do? How many more Normans? How many more horses? How many more French Napoleonic cuirassiers? Whatever. It's a great anecdote to sort of take yourself out of there. No, don't need to worry about that anymore. You're painting figure blocks. Yeah. But you've still got a war game. I mean, one point which somebody did mention to me, and I think it's a really valid question, isn't this just a board game? No. I totally take on that point that you are ending up with something which is physically flatter than a lot of war games because you don't have the height contours that you would have in like 28mm, 15mm game. But you've still got a war game. You've still got something which you have a board which isn't spatialized by reference to hexes or squares or areas of control. You've still got a terrain area, and you've still got figure blocks that you're moving around. It is still, to my mind, definitely a war game and not a board game. And it is, you're moving figures on that board in any way you want in accordance with the rules. And that doesn't seem to me to be particularly like a board game, because a board game, you've got a board. and you can go certain places or spaces or areas in the board. Although it is obviously closer to a board game than Chain of Command would be or Bolt Action might be. But I still think that you've got a war game, you've got a figure war game at its heart. It's just refocused on a slightly different type of action which you're trying to simulate.
Mm. And as the great guru himself says, it's just a token. Everything in wargaming is a token. A single figure is a token.
Yeah.
This particular token is a battalion of infantry.
Yeah.
But in my case, I'm using 40 by 20 bases with blocks of troops on them, usually between 50 odd men on each, 50, 60 men on each block. It looks like a battalion because some are in lines, some are in columns, some are in squares. The cavalry are all spaced out. The light cavalry, are sort of a bit more ragged. The heavy cavalry are tighter together in lines. It looks like what it's meant to represent, just on a small little base. Okay, so let's look at costs then. So, okay, let me give you an idea. So I'm doing Napoleonic. So I'm doing 1812, attacking to Russia.
Uh-huh.
So for each one of my bases will represent a battalion. Say a battalion of infantry, 40 by 20 base, MDF, 2 mil. On there, I will have some figures. I could use one of the very nice 52-man march column blocks with maybe a small stand of a small commander stand next to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I could buy 3 of those blocks for 66 pence, which means the figures for that one whole unit, that one whole base, is going to cost me about 22 pence. No, I tell a lie. Let's add on another 10p because I want some command on there as well. So 30 pence for that one block. Artillery. Now, and again, this is the big thing that's great about these games, is you have artillery numbers. I don't know about you, if I'm playing a 28mm game or a 15mm game, you have a couple of stands of artillery and all the troops go flying behind them because artillery bases are quite small. And in fact, the artillery train would have gone back about half a mile. When you're playing in 2mm games, or in the rules I play, you have the bigger 80 by 40 bases, which I use for my artillery train. And on there, I've got, probably about 50 pence worth of figures. I've got some limbers towing guns. I've got some artillery caissons, strung out on the road. I might have a couple of stands of infantry spare because I bought a load. Chuck them on there as well. You've got a nice little diorama. So I think I've spent for my entire French force, which is a corps of 3 or 4 divisions, I think it cost about 15 to 20 pounds, if that.
It's not bad.
So what you're telling me then is actually the MDF base is the most is actually the most expensive part of the army.
It would be, yes, but it's a regular, good old regular. Now they do horse and musket army, so you're not buying a French figure. Their figures, their horse and musket figures will do you from 7 Years' War all the way up to ACW. It's the same figure. You just paint them different colours. They do a Napoleonic French army for £13, which has, what's it got? It's got 48 24-man battalions, 12 skirmisher bases, 18 heavy cavalry strips, 4 lancer strips, 18 light cavalry strips, 8 artillery sets, and 9 assorted generals. It's £13. That's pretty much a whole army. It's quite easy to dip your toe into this and have a little play. Because
it's a good price for what you get, and there's countless battles that you could have just with a French and a Russian army like that, and you're coming in significantly under £50. I mean, one of the points you made, Mike, is a really, really good point. I should have mentioned that as well. I mean, deploying artillery on the battlefield, everyone loves to do that, but you rarely represent the full train. I mean, there's a reason that once you've deployed your artillery, you really struggle to move it in the early modern period because it's just really difficult to move, and part of your baggage train is linked with the artillery. But in 2mm, you can actually deploy that. And in the games that we had for Lutzen, each side had a baggage train on 60 by 60mm bases and between 2 and 6 elements. So you can have a really significant baggage element. And that, unsurprisingly, was a key feature of battles of the period, protecting your baggage. Now, all of that stuff that everyone knows, you can actually reflect on the tabletop. All of the difficulties of deploying artillery down a road, you can try and reflect to a scale which is commensurate with what's really happening. And that's not costing very much. So we regularly do packs of camps and packs of wagon trains, which are really reasonable, and you get tons and tons of tents and baggage elements. And those are great just to sort of paint up as sort of mini dioramas.
Yeah.
Certainly in the costs, it's a good thing to dip your toe in, as you say, and it wouldn't cost the earth.
So this is quite strange because we started talking about 2mm gaming, but what we've actually been talking about is playing games at an army level. We've been talking about multi-core level games but we're using 2mm figures because for us it's the best scale to represent what each one of those little bases is. Each one of those tiny little bases is a battalion. So you could do a 28 and just have 2 men. And say those 2 men, that's a battalion. But it wouldn't really look right, would it? Personally, I want a battalion that looks like a battalion. 2mm just gives me that.
Yep, that's it.
Cool. Okay, then, folks. Thank you for comprehensively covering that particular question. So, on that note, I think we will leave it there for this discussion on 2mm gaming, and we'll take another break. And when we come back, it's time to wrap up. So, when we discovered that we were having Sir Sidney gracing us with his presence, the word went out, and a couple of things happened, didn't they, Mr. Hobbs?
Yeah, but you kind of have to blame a certain Mr. Clark for this, because well, actually, it might actually be new to because there was a photograph. A publicity shot of the host of the Oddcast signed by yourself. And it's a lovely photograph. It's you looking relaxed in a very nice woolen, is that a cardigan or sort of jumper style thing? Is it?
It's this year's knitwear collection.
This were, yeah.
From the Roundwood Tailoring Emporium.
Yeah. Reading a very interesting book called A Walk in the Dark.
An inaptly chosen book. By me for the occasion. Yeah, it's a very good book about the English Civil War, but we'll leave that aside.
Yeah. So I turned around to Mr. Clark when he gave me this photograph at Crusade, and I said, would you mind if I was to scan this in and put it out for a little competition? And he went, no, I heartily agree. We should put it out there for people to edit, and we'll give a little prize to the funniest edit. Now, this is not going to work very well because it's audio, so we'll probably have to put all of the photographs up on the blog somewhere. Obviously with a warning, Neil.
Yes, because yes, some are perhaps not quite so safe for work as others.
So let me just run through the ones we have, and I'll try and describe them for you if I can, and then Sid, if you'd just like to say which is your favourite. I think you've seen them all, haven't you?
I have, unfortunately. I cannot read. Unfortunately, I have seen all of them.
Yeah. So we start off with Daily Dwarf, that well-known role player Glitterati, who's done a very nice Judge Sidney.
I like
which
that
is,
one.
Yeah, it is Judge Sidney reading the law with a little quote saying that unpainted lead pile is a crime, citizen. Which I thought was very good. It came in very, very quick.
Mm.
Then Mr. Beamish, who made you see painting. He did a few. He did an awful lot.
Well, it almost strikes him that the gentleman has had a tad too much time on his hands.
Yes, yeah. So the first one was he just changed the book cover, very subtle. He changed the book cover to I think it was the history of combat knitwear, which is actually apparently is a real book. He then did a rather disturbing one, which is a picture of you, Sidney, completely naked, smiling, playing the piano, and looking back in a slightly come hither look, shall we say.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And his final entry, again, was very subtle, where he just made one tiny little change, which is to change the L in walk to an N.
Tiny, but important.
Tiny, but
Important, indeed.
Yes. Mr. Bond, Mr. Jeffrey Bond, has somehow got a picture of you reading the bolt action rule set, Sidney.
Well, it happens sometimes.
It does happen sometimes, but very nice. Bombadil and Noddy Lard, one of the Lard people, has done a very nice one saying, some say that I'm the good-looking one of the odd cast. Well, have you seen the other two?
I like that one. That's good.
Yeah. A classic meme. And then we have Stu G, which I quite like. He's done a little bit of art on this, and you need to see it. He's added a very sort of porn star style moustache and a quiff, and your glasses are now red, and your book is changing to My Life with the Welsh Wizard. And then there was a few there's been a few that Nick have done, but I think we can just bypass those completely. Yeah, we'll gloss over. I mean, Nick try. He does try.
He's so trying, man.
Wasn't too good. Yeah. So I think that's about all I could find. So,
Goodness.
So Sid, yes, I think you need to make a decision.
Well, I mean, thank you very much for everyone for sending in those treasured moments following when I was photographed. I can't remember what Rich said to me when he was taking the photograph. I have been caught out like this before, so I should really just walk around with a paper bag on my head. But I've got to say, Gareth, for me playing the piano, I do play the piano, but I don't think I've ever played it with quite that look on my face before. Or with that tie, Gareth, which obviously is from a very respected gentleman's club, coming to a tailoring collection near me soon. So I think Gareth's got to win that one, but I enjoyed seeing them all, although I think my eyes melted in some of them, and not in a good way.
Well, I think what we'll do is obviously we'll get these up on the blog, so you can. We'll send you links there, so you can save them.
Thank you. Well, my lawyers will be in touch if that happens, Mike.
Excellent.
About it.
So Gareth, you have won the prize. Now, we haven't actually discussed what the prize is.
I'm sure we can find something appropriate for Gareth. That should terrify him.
Yeah. There we go. And I do have Gareth's address.
Indeed.
You should be very, very frightened then in that case.
Yes.
Wonderful.
So well done, Gareth. But you're glad you entered that.
Expecting my restraining order within the hour.
Right, and I understand as well, Mr. Hobbs, that you have gathered some questions.
Yes, we've had a few questions in from listeners. So let's start with those. Maybe nice and quick. So first set of questions is from Mr. Jeffrey Bonds. Hello, Jeff, yet again. First question is, Sid, have you passed your St. Albans War Games Club probation yet?
No, it's never been formally confirmed. Richard did say to me when I first encountered him on the telephone, as I mentioned earlier, that there's always a probationary period. That's not yet been confirmed. So no, I'm not a full member, obviously. So yeah. Perhaps one day.
Ah, cool. And a follow-on question from Mr. Bond. For the amount of ribbon and abuse he receives from Messrs. Clark and Skinner, would he be accepting his sainthood from the Pope?
I'd love to have a sainthood from the Pope, even if just because that would annoy Richard intensely. The fact that one of his friends is a Catholic and also he's been canonised. Yes, I can imagine nothing better.
Excellent. Right. We then have a question from a Dutch listener, Mr. Gust Bakker. Now Sidney has become a big name star in his own right. Does he feel that time has come where the two fat laddies limit his potential, and that time has come, once again, so it must be translation issues, for him to seek out a larger stage on which to perform?
Always looking for a larger stage than the Rill Pavilion. I can certainly say that, and certainly larger than the Skedness Amphitheatre that I was doing panto in one year. So yes, I very much look for a larger stage in that regard. Maybe a local regional weather presenter might be my next thing. Who knows?
Yeah, I do think it's time that you should drop the shackles that are Mr. Clark and Skinner.
Well, it could happen this year. It could happen this year with my 2019 spring knitwear collection. You never know. This could be the year.
Yeah, it's always difficult when you get these creative differences in any sort of podcast.
It's always tragic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Okay. Okay, now we have one from Ralph from Walthamstow. Which is no. It says, Sid, love your show. Why do you have those?
My show. Oh, that's not going to go down well in St. Albans.
He says, love the show, your show. I'm creating a participation game for a local show, and I know that you are a master craftsman with an artistic eye. Do you have any tips for how to create terrain for award-winning show games?
Oh, that's a loaded question if ever there was one. I'm afraid I don't, because I've never won an award for my terrain, as everyone will know if they listen to the podcast. So I can't comment on that, Ralph. But thank you very much for the question anyway. If only I was going to be honoured with an award at a game for the terrain I've created. But it's not happened yet, so I cannot answer that question. Apologies, Ralph.
Okay. We have another one from Ralph.
I thought you might.
And this has got a very difficult to pronounce word in it. So I'm just going to just type it into the notes and just ask if anybody can actually.
This is slanderous, Mike. Just think carefully. Solicitors' letters are wending their way down to Aberdeen as we speak, and we're about to print one off.
Excellent.
So carry on. Don't worry about it.
Do you have a template one? So okay. So
never admit that to clients.
No. So again, from Rolf from Walthamstow. Sid, have a great night on the show. Great to see you on a superior podcast at last. He'd like to know whether we are likely to see more instruction, red trousers at a wargaming show, or alternatively, what fashion tips you have for those of us who want to add a touch of class to our gaming wardrobe.
Well, as anyone who is a sort of a follower of fashion will know, those trousers are not actually red, but terracotta. and they only appear in summer months, which doesn't tend to be a wargaming period for wargaming shows. So unfortunately, no, they appear regularly at cricket matches, but not at wargaming shows. Sorry.
Oh, so Rolf from Wolfers has obviously got misinformation there.
Well, the man who describes my trousers as being red as opposed to terracotta, clearly not really paying any attention at all.
Yes. Well, Rolf did use the word estruction. Estruction. ESTRUCAN.
Oh, Etruscan.
Etruscan. Etruscan red trousers.
Well,
So-
Ralph should check his hearing, because the other pair of trousers was not terracotta, but Tuscan. Tuscan. Not
Tuscan.
Etruscan.
Etruscan.
Oh,
That's
dear.
what threw me.
Somebody just wasn't paying attention when it was ancient history at school.
Yes. Ralph, you've let me down by misspelling and making me fall over a word which apparently doesn't exist.
Well, it might exist, it just wasn't the colour of my trousers on that particular day.
Yeah, I can imagine that Ralph and Wolfso didn't go to a particularly fine school.
He's got a very inferior tailor.
Mm.
So.
Yeah. I heard he's a bit tubby as well. He's,
Yes, he struggles in that report.
Yeah.
I refer to it as struggling.
Chocolate, yeah. So there we go. That's the questions from the audience for today.
Well, they were wonderful, Mike. Thank you for those.
No, don't thank me. Don't thank me. Say thank the customers. thank our listeners. We love them all.
Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. Thank you, listeners, and thank you to Mr. Roundwood for being so open and honest with with his answers. So one more thing before we go, a final thing before we go, which of course is our regular segment of what has Dave bought this week. Now, if you remember, on the last show, my esteemed colleague gave out a heartfelt plea.
It was heartfelt, Neil. It was heartfelt.
Yes.
Yeah.
To the aforementioned Mr. Hickman to, go forth and give us some more material for this dedicated segment, celebrating the rise of the anti-luff. And I can report that following the guffaw and peals of laughter that greeted him while he was listening to the podcast at work, and I kind of knew what bit he got to at that point. But Mr. Hitman has manned up. He has seen the error of his ways, and he is indeed going forth and has purchased. Well, in fact, even more, it was inspired by you. Do you remember, whilst we were visiting Glenbrook Towers, you came along with those two lovely little Vospers from that you'd managed to acquire free from the front cover of War Games Illustrated. And yes. Well, Mr. Hitman has gone out and he has sought out a copy of the Cruel Sea starter set.
Good man. Well done.
So he will be probably driving himself mad building little boats.
Oh, they're easy.
In the non-too-distant future. But what is more? I will just have to say that we are bracing ourselves. We are bracing ourselves for what will be our first wargaming show of the year, which is the Robin show in Nottingham, which is happening in a couple of weeks after that we record this, because Dave has decided he's going to be more active and maybe perhaps not quite so active online in some of his figure purchases, but he's going to be a darn sight more active when we go to shows. So I suspect that when we have our next segment of what the Anti-Love has been buying, we will be inundated with information, all off the back of your heartfelt plea. So thank you indeed, Mr. Hobbs. You have reinvigorated the Anti-Love.
I'm glad. Although I have just just thought of a downside to this. It's the
Yes.
fact that we're going to the UK Games Expo with Dave for 3 days. And last time we were there with him, I ended up looking like a Sherpa carrying his stuff behind him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the phrase? I'm going to need a
Sherpa.
yeah, and I'm probably going to need a bigger roof box
Yeah.
just for going home.
Yeah.
Excellent stuff. Well, here we are. It's the end of the show. So all that was left to be said is, first off, Sir Sidney, thank you so much for joining us on this show. I know it's been a bit of a long one, but having said that, it is a show that its length reflects your stature in the hobby, and I want to thank you so much for coming on and for waxing lyrical about your hobby and about your love of 2mm gaming, and thank you for joining us. We've had a great time, mate. It's been fab. Thank you so much for coming on.
It has been fantastic.
Thank you very much, both of you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I love the show. Thank you for putting up with me for so long. It was very kind.
But before you do go, Sid, I think we have to say something because, well, I was told something by a certain Mr. Clark the other day.
Oh God!
He told me that Sydney is not actually a real name; that it's a nom de plume, as he called it, and that actually your real name is Tristram.
Oh, that's clearly slanderous. I'm afraid that is just not true. My name is not Tristram.
Tristram. Okay.
It is things as well.
Yeah. If it helps, I do have the email here still.
That's what we call evidence.
That's evidence, yes. Yeah. No. And would you like to would you like me to send you this evidence, as you like to call it?
That'd be most useful. Thank you.
Oh,
You're assisting the court in that regard.
Excellent, yes.
I've had a great time. Thank you very much for having me, and look forward to seeing you at one of the shows. That'd be great. Or that's approaching Market Garden.
Indeed, it will be great to catch up, Sid. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been great. So, all that is left is to say thank you once again to the Welsh Wizard for joining us on this show. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you for the contributions.
Thank you for inviting me, as always. Thanks to the Meeps for supporting us. And just thanks to everybody. I'm in a good mood today.
Excellent stuff. And thank you to everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it really useful. And we'll be back with you in a couple of weeks. Until then, take care. Happy gaming. We'll speak to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, why not share it with others by leaving us a review on iTunes? And if you have any comments or questions, you can always email the show. The address is info@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. And you can also visit our webpage, where you'll find a complete episode archive, all the View from the Veranda podcasts, rules reviews, and our blog of hobby items and news, which is updated several times a week. This is also where you'll find the links to our presence on social media, and here you can follow us on Twitter or join our Facebook group. And finally, here you can also find details should you wish to support us by making a donation to the podcast. All this on the Meeples and Miniatures website, www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.